Disc 6.
Saturday morning. Staffe has called Tony Ford in. All morning he's been searching for a connection between Ford and Deborah Bowker, or Leanne Colquhoun, or Nico Cashel, or the Watkinses. Tony has a couple of minor charges from his teens, but nothing since Tanya was born. He's not in any political organisations, and there's no way of finding out if he has any link with Vaba. Why would he? There's never been any report of Tanya being attacked before. The electoral records come through online, and he gets a call that Tony Ford is here and is saying he doesn't want a brief, that he has nothing to defend. Staffe tells them he'll be straight down and runs the filter on the register. Tony Ford's housing DNA flickers up and shows everywhere he has ever been officially resident. A cursory glance shows he has hauled himself up the chain, from one estate to the next, until he presumably bought one, made a killing, and moved into a flat in the Elephant, then made the leap west to his townhouse. But Staffe sees a glitch. For 6 months before he moved to the Elephant, Tony Ford, his wife, and a young Tanya lived on the Limekiln estate. "You've got some fucking nerve, you lot." Tony Ford sits back with his arms folded across his chest and his legs stretched out. Even though he's been trawling the data since early morning, even though he is desperate for a break, Staffe doesn't really want Tony to bite. He wants whoever is doing this to be somebody else, not Greta Cashel or Linda Watkins or Tony Ford. "You haven't said whether you know them." "I don't remember everyone I've ever met." "Run me through where you've lived before." "Then can I go?" "Then you can go." "Stratford, Dalston, Elephant, Fulham." "Moving up in the world, Tony," says Staffe. "Moving west." "It's what my wife wanted. What's best for Tanya?" "You wouldn't want to stay on a rough old estate, not with a young child. A young child you'd do anything to protect. Or avenge." "The fuck you talking about? I never lived nowhere rough. Just 'cause they're out east, or I'd say the Limekiln was pretty rough." "The Limekiln?" "Just before you bought your place in the Elephant. You don't remember everything, do you, Tony?" "It was years ago." "You ashamed, Tony?" He stands up, says, "You said I could go." "I'll ask you once again. Have you ever heard of or met Leanne and Carl Colquhoun, Deborah Bowker, Ross Dennis?" "No." "Then you can go." "What?" "I've got what I wanted, Tony. I'm sorry." "Sorry?" "To have dragged you away from your family." Tony Ford gives Staffe a quizzical sideways glance as he leaves, thinking Staffe might be taking the mick. But he sees straight off that he's not. "I'm going to find the bastard who did that to your Tanya, Tony. But let us do it. Don't do it yourself. There's enough lives ruined in all this." Tony Ford nods at him, looks as if he might be thinking something through. Gibbets Lane is a mid-19th century terrace in the shadow of the Limekiln Tower. At 6 o'clock, Errol Regis puts his head out of the front door of number 18. He looks left and right down the empty street and ventures out, pulls the door gently behind him. He looks up at the clear, milky blue sky and walks down towards the petrol station on Old Street. Errol looks older than he is, with flecks of grey in the temples of his growing-out prison cut. Even though his father was born in Nigeria and met his mother in Jamaica, 3 years inside has made Errol's skin go pale. He doesn't even look black anymore, to himself. As Teresa said when he came home, "El, you look like you seen a ghost." He plays with the keys in his pocket, unaccustomed to the simple privilege of being able to secure the opening of his own door. After 3 years in Belmarsh, Errol prefers the early mornings, shying away from the tumult of cars and lorries and people whirring through his corner of the city. It's what cons find hardest, the lightning speed of life on the out. Regis makes his way nervously across the forecourt of the petrol station and picks a copy of the news from the plastic shelves outside the kiosk. He looks over each shoulder as he scans the story of a London in the grip of vigilantes. Regis is afraid, skulks into the kiosk to pay. 3 years ago, Errol was convicted of raping Martha Spears, a 12-year-old girl, in Victoria Park. The girl identified Errol and his DNA was found at the scene. He was already on licence for supplying ecstasy and coke to teenagers in the park. It was a conviction that everybody but Regis wanted, and the judge gave him 6 years. Even though Errol has always maintained his innocence, he knows there are plenty of people who'd think he'd be better off dead. "We have to be prepared for another attack." Staffe is addressing his team. The incident room is packed. "They threaten to come back and finish Montefiore off, so we know their appetite's not sated." It's 10 o'clock on Saturday morning, and half the team have families. Most people in the room wouldn't want to be in ordinarily, but this isn't ordinary. This is front page and hotting up. "2 attacks, sir," says Johnson, looking like death warmed up. "It's hardly a serial killing spree." Staffe wants to tell Johnson to shut up, but he knows it is time to disclose the Stenson case. He's got an appointment with Pennington in half an hour, when he'll tell the DCI about the Cashel connection. He takes a deep breath, scans the room as he says, "There was another case 3 years ago. It was handled by the Met, and a woman called Lottie Stenson allegedly abused a 10-year-old girl called Nicoletta Cashel. The CPS didn't push it, and Nico Cashel, the girl's father, got hold of Lottie Stenson in her own home. He broke her fingers, one by one, then her forearms and her shins. The pain killed her." Everybody in the room has shifted forward in their seats. Some whisper to each other. There is something special in the air. "Some victim," says Johnson. "Call Lottie Stenson what you like. She was attacked, just like Colquhoun and Montefiore. We're here to catch up with the perpetrator. Stop them from doing it again." "It's kicking off already, sir," says Johnson. "We've had a couple of attacks on sex offenders out east. Whoever's doing this is going to be a hero to some people. That's why I want you to get onto every case of sexual abuse the CPS has dropped in the last 3 years. I want you to get in touch with the defendants and tell them to exercise caution. And I want you to contact all sex abuse cons who've been released onto our patch in the last 3 months." "And what about getting onto the CPS? Telling them to reopen some of the cases," says Johnson. "We're here to uphold the law, Johnson, not practice it. Chancellor's checking out why the Stenson, Colquhoun and Montefiore cases weren't pursued." "The CPS want it on a plate," said Johnson. "We bust our bollocks and—" "Thanks, Johnson. We'll just have to keep busting our bollocks, I'm afraid. That's why this job is so bloody rewarding." Everyone laughs, but they know it's time to knuckle down. For some, this will be the biggest case of their careers. Staffe points them to the coded charts that indicate individual and group tasks. The team disperses, and Staffe waits for the call from Pennington. He reads the potted biographies of Carl and Leanne Colquhoun in the newspaper, so hurriedly woven into a jumbled tale of lost love and heavy-handed policing. Buried in the text is the news that Carl Colquhoun's funeral is on Monday. He makes a note to attend and sees a smeared reflection of himself in his window. He should have shaved. Should have a comb to run through his hair. The buzzer goes, and Staffe takes a swig from the Listermint in his drawer and sprays right guard inside his jacket. He slaps himself on each cheek, harder than you'd think you could. It makes his eyes water. He strides up to the 5th floor, knocks on Pennington's door, and turns the handle before he gets a response. Pennington is caught unawares and closes a file quickly. A copy of the news is on his desk, covered in lime green highlighter pen. Staffe takes a seat without being asked and says, "We've had a breakthrough, sir. Do you remember Lottie Stenson?" And as he says Stenson, he fixes his look on Pennington. More slowly he continues, "There's a connection between Greta Cashel, the wife of the man who killed Lottie Stenson, and Tyrone Watkins. And there's a connection between the same woman and Deborah Bowker. I need a warrant to search the houses of Greta Cashel and Tyrone Watkins, and I want to pull Deborah Bowker in for questioning. We need to fly her over from Tenerife." He tries to smile, but Pennington doesn't let it work. Pennington picks up the newspaper and shakes it in the air. "How in God's name did you allow this to happen? We're already a laughingstock, and what you're telling me now points to there actually being a vigilante killer out there. We've already had attacks on registered offenders. I want to be quashing these rumours, not confirming them." "I'm getting closer. They're going to do it again, I know they are." "Jesus, Staffe, is that supposed to be a good thing?" "The victim will be someone the CPS has failed to convict for a sex offence. And the avenger will be someone from a group called VABA, Victims Against Being Buried Alive." "What?" "I need a warrant to search their premises." "We have one murder and one assault. As far as I know, they're not connected. The second one might be a copycat of the first, but that's it. The Stenson case was years ago." Greta Cashel, the mother of the girl that Stenson attacked, is a member of VABA. Deborah Bowker is in her damned address book. Because they've got something in common. The children were the victims of sexual abuse. Victims the CPS failed to protect. The CPS don't follow through on more than half of their cases, you know that. And Tyrone Watkins was in VABA too. It's a support group, Staffe. Of course people in similar situations are going to know each other. How do you know about her address book? You've already been into the Cashel house, haven't you? The Cashels are at the heart of all this, I know it. Nico Cashel is doing life for killing Lottie Stenson, and there's not a shred of evidence, just the confession he coughed up to Jessup. Jessup? Jesus, man, I thought we'd seen the back of him. Pennington twiddles with the pen, swivels on his seat and looks out of the window. This is a mess, Staffe, a right bloody mess. I thought you'd have learned after the way you brought Leanne Colquhoun in. You're making us look like idiots. You're making me look like an idiot. I've made the connection, sir. These 3 cases are linked, and I'm sure there will be another attack. It'll be the biggest case of the year, not just here in the city, but anywhere in the country. If we give it up, we will look like idiots. Give me the resources and the rest of the time you said I could have. That's all I want. You fuck this up, Staffe, and you'll be in the same boat as bloody Jessup, believe me. Staffe stands up, says, "So, can I have the warrants? What choice do I have? And the overtime? You can have the team you've already got on full overtime and the code black on the uniforms. And I'll get Deborah Bowker flown over." "Well, what if she won't come?" "I'll just have to persuade her." "You still got that golden touch with the ladies, Staffe? I'd heard your powers are on the wane." "What do you mean?" "You call her, Staffe. A tenor says she's not here by Monday. That'll be too late for you." Staffe extends his hand and takes a firm grip as the two men shake on the bet, each pretending they're not trying too hard to get the upper hand. "What do you want?" "I told you everything I know," says Deborah Bowker down the phone. "There's no point me coming all the way over there." "Well, that's not for you to say, Mrs. Bowker. Or should I say Mrs. Colquhoun?" "Don't call me that." "Are you harassing me?" "That's an easy card to play for someone who's got something to worry about." "Why would I be worried?" "I don't know, Deborah, but this case is hotting up over here. It'd be interesting to see what the press over there made of an expat's past." "I'm calling my lawyer." "You do that, Mrs. Colquhoun." "Stop calling me that!" Staffe lets a silence develop. He doesn't want to tell Deborah Bowker he knows that only a couple of months ago she travelled to England on her supposedly lost passport as Mrs. Deborah Colquhoun. "You still there?" snaps Deborah Bowker. Staffe softens his voice and brings the mouthpiece right up close. "Deborah, this is something we have to do. We know exactly where you were when Carl was murdered, and of course you couldn't have done it. But I'm under pressure to interview you. I haven't really got the time to come to you, and I don't want to stir things up with the authorities over there. But I would." "When would you want me?" "The sooner the better. Do you want to bring the children?" "No, absolutely not." Staffe has the cursor hovering over the Book Now box on the Albion Airways website. "I could have a car pick you up tomorrow morning after your breakfast. I could get you into first class." "How long will I be there?" 3, 4 nights. There's a nice hotel in Mayfair we use sometimes." "You can't buy me, Inspector." "I wouldn't try, Deborah, and that's the truth." He clicks. Can't wait to collect his winnings from Pennington. Josie skips down the leaden gate steps, looking excited as she slides into the Peugeot's passenger seat. She smells cool, clean, but there's a smudge of the night to her. "You look pleased with yourself," he says, firing up the car, driving them away. "Pulford told me you got an E-type. Why can't we go in that?" "It's older than me, for Christ's sake." "You're not looking for sympathy, are you, sir?" "What do you know about these attacks on the lime kiln?" "You know there's 7 people living there on the sex offenders register? 7. "How did you get on with the CPS?" Josie twists to face him, hooks her foot so that it's under her bottom. "The Watkins case was a couple of months after Cashel, and according to the CPS, Sally Watkins was all set to go through full disclosure. She had positive psychiatric reports and all the forensics stacked up against Montefiore. Then she withdrew. Montefiore was charged but released on bail. A trial date was set and all the documentation was ready to go, But the CPS had to let it go because Sally's mother said she wasn't up to it. Said the disclosure was acquired against their will. There was an interview directly with Sally. Some caseworker had gone round and not waited for a mum to get home from work. It's procedure getting in the way of justice. Point is, it was the Watkins family that didn't put Montefiore in the dock, not the CPS. And it was the same with Nicoletta Cashel. It was only a few weeks earlier that Greta Cashel stopped the CPS from interviewing Nicoletta. It was Nico Cashel that reported the assault by Lottie Stenson, not the mother. Don't you find that funny? There's such a thing as being in denial, and I suppose it fits. The father takes her in, gets the case prosecuted. The mother steps in, protects her daughter the only way she knows how, by stopping the assault from being raked over and over by the likes of Stan Buchanan. And the father can't cope. He needs his vengeance, so he goes out and gets it. But he gets caught and he's banged up. That means he can't be connected to Montefiore or Colquhoun, says Josie. Greta Cashel joins Vaba and hooks up with Tyrone Watkins and Deborah Bowker, maybe even Leanne Colquhoun. Well, who would feel strongly enough to string these people together, says Josie. Maybe it's not a case of which one of them is behind it, maybe it's all of them. I bet Deborah Bowker pulled the disclosure on what Carl Colquhoun was doing to his kids. She had no faith in us. Then she met someone who could show her a way. Let's go and see Greta Cashel. She was the first. Errol Regis wipes his mouth and looks into the toilet. He pulls the chain and his vomit spirals away. This time last week he was conducting his ablutions in the presence of another man on Belmarsh's vulnerable wing, Fraggle Rock, to the rest of the prison population. Errol had no choice but to go vulnerable, put himself in with the kiddie fiddlers and the rapists. He was doing a 6-year for raping Martha Spears, but he was also claiming he was innocent. Cons can't stand that, pretending you're better than them, so Errol had to do his time as an innocent man amongst the lowest of the jail's lowest scum. Now, the week he gets out, the radio prickles with vengeance. There have been more vigilante attacks this morning, some of them up on the lime kiln. And as he takes his copy of the news into his damp Victorian parlour, from where he can look up at the lime kiln tower, he practically hears the hot breath of the righteous on his neck. He's on the register. Anyone who cares could find him. And he can't just move away, start again. If he misses his probation meetings, his licence will breach, and he'll be back inside for the other half of his 6-year tariff. It might be the safest place, but innocent men don't walk back into jail. Teresa Regis comes downstairs in her dressing gown and sits on the edge of the threadbare sofa. She looks up at her husband, and Errol can see she doesn't believe he didn't do it. She says she does, but he knows her too well. Most men, when they get out of jail, are like dogs with 2 dicks. Errol hasn't laid a hand on Teresa yet. The first night, when she rolled over and hooked her leg over his, she rubbed herself up on him. She put her hand on him. There wasn't so much as a twitch. Poor Teresa started to cry, and so did Errol. He asked if she wanted some cocoa, and she said, "Is it 'cause I'm too old, El?" When he saw Martha Spears all beaten up and cowering in the dock as she testified against him, something inside Errol died. The man who did it to her is out there and doing it still. We all need someone to blame, but Errol can't blame young Martha. "Can I make you a cup of cocoa, love?" he says. Teresa picks up the paper. She reads about Leanne Colquhoun and Guy Montefiore, and someone out there who can't take any more rough justice and is taking matters into their own hands. She says, "Make yourself one, love." As she says it, tears run down her cheeks. They cut dark, crooked lines on her smooth, dried black skin, and as she looks up at Errol with sad, wide eyes, he knows that she's going to leave him. Who can blame her? From the cafe opposite the petrol station at the end of Gibbert's Lane, the man watches Teresa Regis close the gate behind her. Sirens warp in the Saturday traffic, and Errol Regis waves his wife goodbye, but her head is down, chin tucked into her chest. She pulls a garishly green moulded plastic suitcase. The man feels sorry for her, and he knows that she will be better off without Regis. The world will be a better place without him, and if someone had done this 3 years ago, Martha Spears would be more than a basket case. This might be the last of his obligations. He doesn't know her Errol's movements yet, hasn't pieced together that repeating pattern of behaviour, but he will cut the fourth rope. Sooner than he'd like, but we don't live in an ideal world. Teresa Regis has barely got on the bus before a police car turns into Gibbert's Lane. It stops outside Errol Regis's house, and a uniformed officer makes his way up the path. If only they protected the innocent with such vigilance. Greta Cashel asks to see Staffe's ID, apologising that she hasn't had the best experiences with the police. She reads the search warrant thoroughly before letting the DI and Josie into her Rains Park home. They work their way through the house, and Staffe reminds himself to ask which room is which. In the box room, Staffe fires up the computer, and Greta watches as he makes his way through the directories. He goes back and forth from the desktop into Works and out of it. There is no address book, no contacts icon. "We'll have to take this away, I'm afraid. I'll try and get it back to you by the end of the week." "I need it for my work." "Well, don't you have a memory stick you can use?" he says. "Yes." And as soon as she says it, Greta Cashel diverts her eyes from Staffe. He nods to Josie, and she moves across to the door to make sure Greta Cashel can't get out, can't follow Staffe as he goes to find the device. She calls out after him, "It's in my handbag! Don't go tipping the place upside down." When he returns and plugs it into the USB port, she looks for all the world as if she has nothing to fear. Staffe goes into the contacts file. "What's VABA, Greta?" says Staffe. "I've forgotten." "And DB? This is a Spanish number." "Why disguise her name?" says Josie. "I did it when I heard about Colquhoun." Staffe lets the cursor drift over the file icon and sees when it was last amended. The day Carl Colquhoun was murdered. Not the day after, nor the day it was reported in the press. Somehow, Greta Cashel knew Carl Colquhoun was dead within an hour of him taking his last fear-sucking breath. "I can understand that, Greta. And when was the last time you spoke to Deborah?" He can practically hear the calculations whirring as Greta thinks about telephone records. And what will Deborah Bowker's version be? 3 years ago? Something like that. When you were grieving? The grief doesn't go away, Inspector. Staffe waits for Greta to look away, gives Josie the nod to step in. Where did Vaba used to meet, Greta? Says Josie. Somewhere out in Surrey, I don't know. Staffe knows she's lying. Now he's not so much interested in the information she provides as how tangled her lies become. He tries to forget that Greta Cashel is the mother of a raped daughter, the wife of an incarcerated husband. And who else went to Vaba, Greta? I've been in and out of therapy, having my head churned up twice a week, and you expect me to... Don't worry, Greta. Don't worry. Josie explains that she will have to go with them to Ledengate. And as Greta tries not to fall apart, Staffe calculates when he might spring the question as to whether she knows Tyrone Watkins. Information is everything, and when they don't know you know what they know, you wait. Josie hooks her arm through Greta's and leads her down the stairs, out of her own front door. Staffe tries to convince himself that he's a good guy. At Ledengate, Greta refuses tea, says she can't wait for the duty solicitor. I have nothing to fear from the truth. I need to get back. Saturday night is our busiest night. You heard what happened to Deborah Bowker's ex-husband. Oh, don't ask me to mourn him. Do you read the news? Why would I waste my time? When was the last time you saw Tyrone Watkins? Greta Cashel looks in her lap and plays with the clasp of her handbag. He was already broken when I met him. He wouldn't do it. Do what, Mrs. Cashel? She looks up. Her eyes narrow to fierce slits, ice cold. Do what's right, Inspector. If only he could have. She opens her handbag, takes out a small red diary, and asks Josie for a pen and a piece of paper. Tell me the times, Inspector, and I'll tell you where I was. Times, thinks Staffe. Where were you when Lottie Stenson was killed, Mrs. Cashel? I was on the psychiatric ward of St. Thomas's Hospital. She gives him a priest's look. Some might say I'm mad still. Then she checks the dates that Josie gives her and accounts for where she was when Carl Colquhoun was killed and Guy Montefiore tortured. Jessup welcomes Staffe and Josie in. Staffe wishes he could be anywhere else, but he has to dig deeper into Jessup's involvement with Greta Cashel and Vaba, and possibly Guy Montefiore. Jessup looks wasted, as if he's been drinking steadily forever. Bizarrely enough, he's clean-shaven and doesn't smell like a tramp. Sorry about the smoke. Sorry it's a shithole, I suppose, says Jessup to Josie, as he chucks a couple of old racing posts off the only armchair in the room and ushers her to sit. Once she is settled, Jessup sits on a large, intricately carved wooden box that looks as if it hails from North Africa, doubtlessly one of Dolores's purchases. It saddens Staffe to think that it must have some kind of sentimental value for Jessup to have negotiated its retention. Jessup lights up. I'd offer you tea, but I don't do hot drinks. He looks at Staffe. Not a whisper for 3 years, and now twice in 2 days. You're spoiling me. It's the Cashel case, says Staffe. You don't say. Nico Cashel took Nicoletta in to press charges. He started the disclosure. Jessup nods, furrows his brow. The mother didn't want the child to be traumatised, if I recall correctly. He sucks hard on his cigarette and coughs out a thin spray of smoke. He punches his chest and smiles at Josie. His life ended the day Lottie Stenson did what she did. If you can accept that, everything makes sense. What were the two of them like together? Nico and Greta Cashel, asked Josie. I can't say I remember seeing the two of them together. Did he blame her for withdrawing Nicoletta from pursuing the case? I'm pretty sure he thought our idea of punishment wouldn't have helped him or his wife, let alone the daughter. A couple of years in jail for Stenson, then a lifetime on the social. Staffe says, people who do what Lotte Stenson allegedly did, are damaged. They need help, regardless of what harm they inflict. Most sex offenders have, I know, the cycle of abuse. Try telling that to Nico Cashel. With his hackles up, life comes back into Jessup's eyes. The Cashels did what they did out of love, not hate. Jessup runs his fingers along the tight curves of the box's carved filigree pattern. He has a faraway look again, and his words reprise what Montefiore said to Staffe just yesterday. Jessup raises his eyes, makes a thin-lipped smile, and Staffe wonders what Jessup thinks of him, the person he has become. He tries to conceive what might be left of the young man Jessup took in all those years ago. Whoever is doing this has called me at home. They've been in my car, too. There's been messages. Looks like you're all sucked in, Will. And giving them what they want? Staffe stands up, knowing he isn't going to get what he came for. Josie follows suit, waits by the door, and watches Staffe and Jessup shake hands awkwardly. She says to Jessup, "You know, Greta Cashel said a strange thing to me. She said that for her it was like being buried alive. She said for victims it was always the same. They are always being buried alive." Jessup scratches his jaw, and life glimmers in his watery eyes. There was a group, if I remember it right. She might have been a member of it. Victims buried alive, something like that. You don't know where it was, do you? Where the group met? He smiles at Josie, as if he has seen something he likes, shakes his head. It's not a time I like to remember. I don't know if Staffe has told you. She looks quizzically at him, shakes her head to try to preserve his self-respect. It was my last case. I didn't leave on the best of terms. He's told me a lot about you, sir, says Josie. She lowers her voice, says conspiratorially, You've a lot to answer for. Jessup laughs, and Staffe shoots a look of mock disparagement at Josie. There's lots we could all be called to answer for. Will's not one I'd be ashamed of. He looks at Staffe. Not when I knew him, anyway. What do you mean? Says Staffe. I hear things. Like that last case. Golding? He's guilty, says Staffe, indignant. I'm sure he is, Will. I'm sure he is. Jessup smiles and reaches out, places a big hand on Staffe's shoulder and squeezes it. We have to uphold the law. That's all we have to do. We have to go, says Staffe. And as they make their way down the stairs through the blare and aroma of ragga and crack pipes, Staffe says, Nice move, catching him about Vabba like that. Deception is nothing to be proud of, she says. Staffe's phone goes, and he sees it is Ledengate. I've checked out Greta Cashel's alibis, says Pulford. She's clean as a whistle. Good, says Staffe. It's weird, isn't it, sir? A case where you don't want to catch a break. When they get to the Villiers estate, Josie looks around, says, You can never know what goes on in these estates. So many doors and windows and secrets. Staffe reaches on the back seat for the Tesco Metro bag. Fast goodies he's picked up en route. What is all that stuff? Just repaying a favour. You really think Tyrone could have done for Montefiore? He's a better prospect than Sally. I can't see her thinking up how to rig those ropes. Sally lets them in. She looks wasted and slopes off into her bedroom. Doesn't even look at the warrant that Staffe shows her. Tyrone is propped up with cushions in front of the wide screen. There's a tin of corned beef on the coffee table in front of him, half eaten with a fork sticking out of the pink and brown meat. He looks up at Staffe and Josie as if he's never seen them before, and flicks from one channel to another to another. "We've come to have a look around," says Staffe. He shows the warrant, but Tyrone doesn't look away from the screen. Staffe knows what he's looking for and goes straight to the kitchen drawers. There, exactly where it was, is the dog-eared leaflet. There's no address, no meeting time, no contact name, just the same 0207 telephone number as on Greta Cashell's database. He takes out a plastic bag and tags the leaflet. While Josie looks in the cabinets in the lounge and goes in to have a look around Sally's bedroom, Staffe unpacks the Tesco bag and finds a bowl. He combines 2 tablespoons of mayo, a squirt of ketchup and the king prawns, then butters 4 rounds of the wholemeal bread. He constructs the sandwich and cuts the crusts off, slices them into triangles, and arranges them neatly on a plate before washing up after him. When he throws the packaging away, he sees a syringe in the bin under the sink, and it makes his heart shrink. It is Saturday afternoon, and London has come out to play. The 4x4s are cruising up and down Clapham High Street, and the tables outside the cafes and bars are teeming. It seems for all the world as though there's nothing to get hung about. Deborah Bowker will be touching down at Heathrow soon. She's being met by Pulford and will be available for interview within a couple of hours. As he weaves his way to Ledengate, Staffe's phone goes again. "Staffe," says John Ball. "What is it?" "I'm afraid there's some bad news. Gloucester Road Nick have been on. Your flat has been broken into. They've not taken anything, but I think you should take a look. There's some... they've written something. It's on the walls, and the officers who went around say they reckon it's been written in blood." Staffe punches the steering wheel and switches lanes, takes the first left he can back towards the north side of the common. As he drives as fast as he can to Queen's Terrace, he thinks about what Jessup said about upholding the law, about Sohan Kelly being taken care of by Pennington. The main door is undamaged, and the uniformed officer tells him that access into the building was gained by someone who must have a key. He's spoken to all the other residents, and one of them had a briefcase stolen on Wednesday. There might have been a spare key in the case. When he gets to the door to his flat, the frame is splintered all around the lock, and the officer sucks his teeth as if to say, "You should know better, sir. You should at least have a double lock." Going into the lounge, there's no sign of a break-in, and it's the same in the kitchen. The only evidence of an intruder is saved for the bedroom wall. There, above the bed, is written in red, "Done soon. Over to you." Errol Regis sits at the small formica-top table in his kitchen. Out the back he can see the cloudless blue of the city sky. The willow tree in the yard somehow flourishes. It has dusty trumpets of dirty white bloom, and he can't remember it being there before he was sent down. Can't remember much of how it used to be before the police came knocking that day, accusing him of interfering with poor Martha Spears. And then came the evidence, from God knows where. A pile of letters are on the table. Most are from his various solicitors. Teresa's letters petered out soon after her visits did. She made her last visit the day after he wrote to tell her his appeal had been turned down. It seems she had more faith in the law than she did in her husband. He goes into the cupboard under the stairs and finds an old can of lighter fluid. Sticks it into the back of his jeans, which are too baggy for him now. He gathers together the letters and slips into the yard, looking left and right as he goes. It feels strange to be living your life in open view of people you don't know. In jail, everyone's in the same boat. Here it seems so random, the people you rub your life against. He makes a pile of the letters in the grid by the back door. Figures that if it makes too much smoke, he can always pour water on it. He squirts the lighter fluid on the papers, strikes a match and drops it, watches it go with a whoosh. Errol feels the lump inside him melt. It rises up from his belly into his throat. It spreads into his lungs. He struggles to catch his breath, and then he begins to wail. He cries like a child who doesn't really know what it's screaming for, just that something it desperately needs is missing from its life. The sun has dropped below the high fence, and somebody in one of the neighbouring yards calls through to ask what's wrong. Soon after, someone from an upstairs window shouts for him to shut the fuck up. And Errol Regis, as has become his wont, does as he is told and takes it inside. "This sounds like an accusation, sir," says Staffe. Pennington is sitting in Staffe's chair. Staffe stands, hands in his pockets like an errant schoolboy. "You're tied up in all this more than is healthy for any of us. First they call you at home when they've tortured Montefiore. You shouldn't have gone in on your own, but you did. And there's the cryptic messages on those photographs. You started grubbing around in the Stenson case and checking up on Jessup. And now your flat is broken into with a message daubed in blood. And there was your car, too." "How did you know about that?" "Who exactly is this case about, Staffe?" "It was sheep's blood, sir." "So bloody what? Whether you like it or not, you're involved. You're personally involved." "I'm leading the investigation. This is all about the investigation. It goes back to when Lottie Stenson was killed. That was when Carl Colquhoun was accused of messing with his kids. It was when Guy Montefiore assaulted Sally Watkins. And I'll wager that it was when Vaber was set up. I've had over a dozen cases of people on the sex offenders register being hounded out of their homes. I got 2 of the thugs downstairs. And Carl Colquhoun was killed this week, not 3 years ago, if it slipped your mind." "I'm right, sir. I'd stake your reputation, Staffe. I hope you got more than you're telling me. I'm glad it's not my reputation." "I've tracked down the property that Vaber used to operate from. And Deborah Bowker's in the country. She's on her way from Heathrow." "She was out of the country when her husband was murdered, for God's sake." "You said I could have a week. You gave me your word." Pennington leans back in the captain's chair, puts his hands behind his head. "There's something else, Will." He gives Staffe a doleful smile. "What is it?" Staffe feels tight in the stomach. "The Police Complaints Authority have opened a file on that young Scroat's allegation the other night." "The E-Gang? You know that's a load of crap." "We have to go through due process." Pennington stands up. "Because of Sohan Kelly." He walks past Staffe. 3 days, Will. I gave the Commissioner my word. You want me to keep my word, don't you?" As he leaves the room, he hands Staffe a £10 note. "That's for getting Deborah Bowker over here. Don't say I'm not a man of my word." Pennington has left his residue on and around the chair. Not unpleasant, just the smell of another. Staffe opens the window and rings through to Johnson for the trace on the Vabber number. The line was disconnected 2.5 years ago, sir. Find out who the freeholder is and check the tenancies in that building over the last 3 years. He's about to ask Johnson how he's faring when the buzzer goes. Pulford says, "We're back, sir. I've got Deborah Bowker here. Just giving her a sandwich and a cup of tea." Staffe clicks Johnson off and says to Pulford, "Take her to interview room 3 when I say so. Get Josie to stay with her in the meantime, and make sure everyone's got their kid gloves on." Stan Buchanan's the duty solicitor. Well, he's got a conflict of interest. He represented Leanne Colquhoun. He says the charges against Leanne have been dropped. He's not budging, sir. I'm coming down. As he makes his way downstairs, Staffe visualises Deborah Bowker and the things she might be capable of. He has to go into reception and out the other side to get to the interview suites. As he does so, he clocks the familiar shape of a man being processed by Jombo. The man sneaks a peek at him, pretending to scratch his ear, and the instant he turns away, the penny drops. It is Ross Dennis, the very man who, in the Ragamuffin pub, told Staffe that Colquhoun had got what was coming. And now Deborah Bowker, who had left the country because of Carl's derelictions against her kids, and Ross Dennis are in Ledengate Nick at the same time. Staffe goes straight on through to room 3, which is empty, and he calls Jombo. "Don't say my name, John. Just tell me what charge code you got on those 2 in reception." "It's a section 43, sir." "On a sex offender? Just say yes or no." "Yes." "Under no circumstances whatsoever is Ross Dennis to be released. And get him out of reception, quick." "Deborah." "Take a seat," says Staffe, taken aback by Deborah Bowker. She has the permatan he expected, but almost everything else disarms him. She's wearing a smart cream suit with a mid-thigh skirt, and her hair is shiny and straight. £100 cut is his guess. She has perfect teeth, and her skin looks in good nick despite the sun. "This is my colleague, DC Josie Chancellor." The women nod and exchange thin smiles. "I've seen the news. Looks like that alley cat hasn't changed her spots. Leanne always would turn a trick for a couple of quid," says Deborah Bowker, her East End accent stretched to the breaking point of how posh it can go. "Let them ask the questions, Mrs. Bowker," says Stanley Buchanan, "and refer to me before you answer." She turns slowly to face Buchanan. "I have nothing to hide, Mr. Buchanan. I volunteered to come here, and if it's all right with you, I'll tell the truth." "Well, of course we tell the truth, Mrs. Bowker." "It's Miss." "Of course," says Buchanan. "When did you drop the Colquhoun name, Deborah?" says Staffe. "The day I kicked him out." "And you got a new passport, I dare say." She takes out her passport and shows it to Staffe. He takes it and smiles, flicks to the back page and notes that the passport replaced a stolen one. He makes a written note of the missing passport's number. As he hands it back, he sees Stanley Buchanan beginning to fret, so he hits them with it. "Your other passport wasn't stolen, was it, Deborah?" "I never said it was." "Ah. Never mind." "Never mind what?" "That you just said you were here to tell the truth. And that you told the passport officials your Colquhoun passport was stolen. And you told us you hadn't been back to England since you left, yet Budget Air had a Deborah Colquhoun on one of their flights this April. And she stayed 10 days. Deborah Bowker smiles at Staffe. I found the passport and never thought anything of it. But then I got the chance of a cheap flight. I keep all my valuables in a safety deposit box over there, and it was a Sunday. I couldn't get to my new passport. She doesn't blink. She doesn't look away. Her voice is calm and unwavering. I'm sure you can check that it was booked on a Sunday. You seem to loathe the name so much, though, Miss Bowker. I loathe him enough for a name to mean nothing. I changed the name for my children. Why lie to us when we asked you if you'd been back to England? Because I knew it will bring you back snooping. I soon realised it was naive of me to imagine you wouldn't get your nails in a little deeper. It was an error. Do you drink, Deborah? Says Josie. A little too much, probably. And did that cause you any problems when you and Carl were together? He caused me enough problems. A few too many glasses of vodka doesn't count when you look at what he did to my children. Did you drink to get at him, to damage him? Deborah Bowker looks at Stanley, then quickly away. Stanley says, I hardly see why you're wasting my client's time with this. You know about Carl, the way his father used to beat him, the other things he did to Carl. Oh, you're not going to get me to feel sorry for him. The things he did to your children, who can blame you if you tortured him? Tortured? You said you took the children away as soon as you found out, Deborah, says Staffe. Of course. And you lot did nothing. Nothing. Josie says, but that wasn't the start of the bad times between you two. Not if you were drinking and he hated it so much. It's no mystery that if I hadn't got pregnant, me and him would never have been together. It was a mistake. 2 mistakes. I tried to make us a family. I tried to make the best of a bad job. Staffe scribbles a note and slips it to Josie. Get Dennis and sit him outside. He waits for her to go and says, We're nearly done, Deborah. I know you weren't happy with the way the allegations against Carl were dealt with by the police and the CPS. However, we're trying to do our jobs as well as we can, and there have been other incidents drawn to our attention. That poor Watkins girl. I read it in the news on the way over here. Let's hope that bastard Montefiore gets what's coming properly this time. Tell me about Vaber, Deborah. Without the faintest hesitation or flicker, Deborah Bowker says, It didn't work. For me, it made things worse, getting together with people who just wanted to keep going over and over the worst thing that's ever happened to you. They were hooked, some of them. They let the grieving replace what they loved. That's no way to carry on. Can you remember who went to Vaber? A whole bunch of people who got more and more into that victim thing. She makes speech marks in the air and shrugs. Specific people, Deborah? It was a while ago. There were only 1 or 2 I ever got on with. One was a man, funnily enough. Tyrone. That's Sally Watkins's dad. He was in bits, poor soul. Like me, he was trying to put it behind him. Anyone else? A woman called Delilah. I forget her surname, but she was a black lady, a real lady. Why was she there? How had she suffered? Her daughter was raped. Poor Delilah. She wanted to go out and kill the bastards. That's why I left, truth be known. I'd have ended up doing time when it should have been him. But you couldn't have killed Carl, could you, Deborah? She smiles. If only I could have been there. Staffe thinks, if only someone had videoed it. Would you have paid someone to kill him, Deborah? Maybe, says Deborah. Miss Bowker, says Stanley. To stop him doing it again? That was Leanne's problem. I told her, what more could I do? Why do you hate her so much? He'd been seeing her for 2 years while he was still with me. He was lining up her kids while mine were getting bigger. When I found out about, what he did to Kimberly, I told Leanne and she told me to piss off. You must have dreamt of getting back at him, says Staffe, as there is a tap on the door and Josie sidles in. And ruin my children's lives more? I found better things to do than having that dirty bastard get his comeuppance. Thanks, Deborah. We might want another word while you're here. We really appreciate you coming in. That's it. Stanley looks at Staffe as if to say, was that it? And as soon as Deborah Bowker gathers her handbag up and makes her way to the door, he says, I forgot. What about a woman called Greta? Greta Cashel. Did you ever meet her at the group meetings? Greta? I didn't like her one bit. But you didn't need to ask me that, did you, Inspector? She calls me every so often. You wouldn't be doing your job if you didn't know that, would you? And she winks at Staffe. Why don't you like her? She gives me the creeps, that's all. If you take my bastard husband as the exception, I'm not a bad judge of character. As she says it, she smiles. Then she opens the door and sees Ross Dennis. The smile disappears. His too. Do you two know each other? Says Staffe. Never seen her, says Dennis. How about you, Deborah? I've seen him. When I lived on the lime kiln. He's that bitch's cousin. You're Leanne Colquhoun's cousin, says Staffe, looking at Dennis, recalling that he claims not to know her. As she slides into the car, Deborah Bowker lifts her feet in the footwell of the Peugeot's passenger seat and looks down at the drinks cartons and discarded newspapers. Staffe says, don't worry, there's nothing important down there. I didn't want to dirty my shoes, says Deborah Bowker, and she gives him a mischievous wink. I take it you're single, she says, looking across at him. She casts her eyes down and back up. Is nothing to be ashamed of? How's your room, says Staffe, looking over his shoulder and pulling out into traffic. It makes me feel like a tourist. Staffe thinks that she's a cool customer, whether or not she has anything to feel guilty about. For most people, simply visiting a police station makes them feel as though they are a criminal. Most wouldn't feel like jaunting around to see the sights. I might even go up the Crocodero later, she says. Staffe laughs out loud, says, I could drop you. Come with me, Inspector. You look as if you need to loosen up. I don't do loose, he says, looking across at her, smiling. She leans forward in her seat, frees up the back of her hair, and her scent wafts through the front of the car. Staffe can't imagine her and Carl Colquhoun together. He can't imagine Linda and Tyrone Watkins together. He wonders at mothers like them fashioning some kind of improvement from the terrible things that happen to their daughters. You've not always been single, Inspector? Staffe brakes and eases himself forward, takes a peek down at how the traffic is on Queensway. "I've always—" He looks in the wing mirror, pulls into the bus lane, gets bad looks and V-signs from the stationary drivers. "Always," she says. He looks across at her, watches her expression soften. Suddenly she looks as if she could be easily hurt. "Always preferred to ask the questions. It's my job, Miss Bowker." "A man can get too much of his own way." Staffe pulls up outside the Grafton and leans across, pushes open Deborah Bowker's door. "Like I said, we'll need to speak with you again." "It's his service on Monday. Are you going?" "Are you going?" he asks. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." "Have you seen his mother yet? Maureen?" "I've got nothing against her." "It's just that she didn't even know you'd moved away. I think she'd like to hear how the children are. I could get my colleague to take you." "I know the way." Bowker gets out of the car and reaches back in for her handbag. "Thanks for the lift, and for not being a bastard." "I wouldn't know how," says Staffe. "Oh, don't spoil it by lying, Staffe." "Staffe," he says. But she shuts the door, walks through the Grafton's revolving front door. He moves off and parks up in the underground car park. There's only one way out of the Grafton, and the Alma Café is straight opposite. He takes his accounts out of the glove compartment and decides to spy on Deborah Bowker for an hour or so. Staffe's accountant sent him the papers 3 weeks ago. It only takes an hour to check them over, but there are always more important things to do. He orders a double espresso and a slice of Dutch apple pie and looks across to the Grafton's entrance, then down at the profit and loss account. The figures look extraordinary. The rental income is twice his salary. But everything is not what it seems. Deductions take their toll. Interest payments, sinking funds for repairs, renovations, and rental voids, management companies' fees, accountants' fees, bank charges, and a provision for the taxman. He looks back out at the Grafton with the figures swimming around in his head and takes a sip of the coffee. It is scalding and bitter, and a much-needed slap to the system. It makes him crave a cigarette. He looks back down to the next page, sees a breakdown of the monthly income, and makes a note to let the accountant know not to expect anything from the Kilburn flat, now Marie is staying there. He turns to the balance sheet and sees how much this part of him is worth, after the building societies have been taken care of. The noughts look absurd, make him feel alone. In the corner of his eye, the shape of Deborah Bowker shimmers. She doesn't look out of place. Somehow she has managed to narrow the gap between the lime kiln and Mayfair. Staffe tips out all the change he has and swigs back the rest of the espresso, follows Bowker up towards Piccadilly. She turns the occasional head as she clips her way up Grafton Street on stiletto heels. Turning onto Albemarle Street, Bowker disappears from view, and Staffe has to break into a trot, stepping off the curb to widen his angle of view, and as a taxi comes towards him, he sees her disappear into the Albemarle pub. Staffe remembers the place from years ago, when he had a night on the tiles with Georgie Best. Not exactly a collector's item, but one to remember. There is a snug on the left as you go in, and a large back room through a small corridor. Staffe waits a few minutes to make sure Bowker has not just gone in to use the toilet. It is a strange place for a woman to come. He glances into the snug and sees her at the end of the bar, his pulse quickening on the way through to the back room, as he glimpses Deborah talking to another woman, younger than her and blonde. At first, he thinks she is Sally Watkins. Surely not. In the back room, Staffe gets himself a spot at the bar and angles himself away from the small gap that shows through to the snug. The same staff serve both bars, and from here he can see the back of Deborah Bowker, a three-quarter profile of Sally Watkins, except it's not Sally Watkins. Is it Leanne Colquhoun? Well, he's sure of it. Or is he going mad? He orders a pint of Carling so as to fit in, and risks another look. Deborah Bowker is neither smiling nor frowning. If it is Leanne Colquhoun, surely there will be some kind of a row going on. He takes a slug of the beer and steals another look through to the snug. Leanne has spent some of Nick Absalom's 30 pieces of silver on a new look. Her hair is cut onto her shoulders, and the blotches on her face have been vanished. Two things concern Staffe. Firstly, Deborah Bowker and Leanne Colquhoun are in earnest conversation with no sign of a fight brewing. Secondly, he mistook Leanne for Sally Watkins, Leanne being the woman he first thought might be the figure behind the hood in the photograph of the butchered Carl Colquhoun. He takes a second and final swig of the lager and leaves, quitting for now while he is ahead. "He's not here," says Becky Johnson down the phone. In the background, Staffe thinks he can hear Johnson calling out to see who it is. "Funny, the station said he left. Never mind. Do you mind if I pop round, Becky?" "There's no point." "How are things?" "Don't you know how things are, Will? Things are crap." Staffe wants to know if she knows all about her husband, but knows he can't. There's a muted kerfuffle on the other end of the phone, and he says, "I'm only round the corner," and he hangs up. When he gets to Milford Street, at the wrong end of the Holloway Road, Staffe braces himself for crossfire. He's known Becky since before Johnson came across from the Met, but in the last few years, since Charlie was born it would seem, she has become increasingly resentful and cold. Maybe it's because the London allowance doesn't scratch the surface of their outgoings, and the pension is a speck on the horizon. Up front and large, Becky Johnson represents the frustrations of a CID widow. "I told you not to come round," says Becky, standing in the doorway with Charlie clasped to her hip. His Teletubby sweats are clearly handed down and smeared with God knows how many meals. "I just need a quick word with Rick." "I told you." "It's all right, Becky, show him in," says Johnson from behind her. He's wearing a T-shirt and boxers, has a duvet draped over his shoulders. "He's done in, Will. Can't you see?" In truth, there's little to deny. Johnson looks like death warmed up. "Just a quick word about Sally Watkins," says Staffe. Becky calls the children through from the lounge to take them into the bedroom. The lounge is open plan to the kitchen and a decent size, but there is a cot in the corner, and it's easy to see that the place isn't big enough for a family of 5. Young Ricky leads the way. He is 6 and runs at Staffe, headbutts him in the stomach and throws his arms around the waist. It is an act of affection, disguised as aggression. Staffe ruffles his hair and throws a few play air punches. "Don't wind him up, Staffe," calls Becky. Sian follows, the oldest. It's all too juvenile for Sian, who has an adult's face. She walks past, head down and glum. Staffe can remember when she was a happy-go-lucky little thing. "Are you okay, Sian?" He beams a smile at her. She says nothing. Staffe looks at Johnson, who looks at the carpet. "You look terrible, man," says Staffe, once Becky has closed the bedroom door on the mayhem. "Thanks," says Johnson. "You corroborated Sally Watkins' alibi, didn't you?" "I wrote it up." "Just tell me if you didn't follow it up." Staffe listens to the commotion in the next room. "We can change the paperwork." She was with some bloke off the estate he's married. I didn't want to go busting his family apart, but it stacked up. What's the problem anyway? You can't finger her for the Montefiore case, surely? No, Colquhoun. Colquhoun? Why'd she do anything to him? She never knew him. Tyrone Watkins knows Deborah Bowker. I don't get it. Johnson sits down on the edge of a threadbare sofa and pulls the duvet tight around him. He's shivering. We can manage without you for a day or so. I'll see you Monday, Rick. A whole day off? Why, thank you, says Becky Johnson, leading the children out of the bedroom. Staffe tries a stoic smile out on Becky as he walks towards the door, but gets nothing back. He wants to ask how the Chinese was the other night, but says nothing. Just as soon as Janine gets back to him about the syringe, Staffe will have words with Rick. He daren't think about the actions he will have to take. As he leaves, young Ricky is trying to wrestle Sian to the floor. She fends him off disinterestedly. Tiny Charlie hits Ricky on the back of his legs with a fish slice, and Becky Johnson starts up on her husband before Staffe can close the door behind him. As he does, Sian looks at him with wide, sad eyes, as if to say she can't live like this much longer. End of Disc 6. Disc 7. Saturday night. Ross Dennis has been brought in for assaulting one of his neighbours, a 5'4" raghead who was supposedly on the sex offenders register. Josie has checked it out, and the victim is not, nor has ever been, on the register. As if Saturday nights in the station weren't bad enough anyway. "The fucking register's wrong, innit?" says Dennis. "Everyone knows what goes on with them Muslim bastards." Staffe raises his eyes to the duty solicitor, who shrugs as if to say, "Don't blame me, I don't get to choose my clients any more than you do." "Even if he was on the register, assaulting him is still a criminal offence." "You saying the law protects him more than me?" "You tell me how you know Deborah Bowker. Tell me why you never told me you are related to Leanne Colquhoun, and then we'll see what the law's got in store for you." "I've been here hours. You charging me, or what?" "Did she tell you what he was doing to her kids? Ask you to sharpen him up, did she?" "You know where I was when that happened," says Dennis with a smug smile. He leans back, puts his hands behind his head. "You knew Carl when he was with Deborah Bowker, and you never liked him then. Deborah told you he was more interested in her kids than he was in her. That's right, isn't it, Ross? Were you giving her one?" "Inspector, please," says the solicitor. "Well?" "My off," says Dennis, unable to resist. "Well, who'd blame you," says Staffe, "for getting involved?" "Involved?" "Maybe you can sleep on it, Ross." Staffe stands up, makes to leave. "You can't just hold me here like this." "An officer will be in soon, to charge you with actual bodily harm and inciting racial hatred, for starters." "You bastard!" "Mr. Dennis," says his lawyer. "Keep it coming, Ross, keep it coming," says Staffe. "It's all good for business." Dennis's smug grin falters. He looks as though he can tell Staffe isn't interested in the ABH. Staffe pauses by the door. "Should be right enough for a 2 to 3 year sentence?" "You ask your friend here," says Staffe, nodding at the duty solicitor. "With your history." "It was self-defence," says Dennis. "I've got a dozen witnesses." "Just like for when Carl Colquhoun was killed. Best we let the courts make sense of it, eh?" And Staffe turns his back on Ross Dennis for a final time tonight. He's had as much as he can take for one day, and decides to kill 2 birds with 1 bottle. In the Steels with Smethurst for a bit of R&R and Met networking. On his way out, he calls Pulford, tells him to chase up the Sally Watkins alibi and get it re-corroborated. Pulford sounds down, but Staffe lets it slide. He can't afford to get sucked into being another man short, so he says he's breaking up and clicks his DS dead. Errol Regis has spent 16 hours sitting in his mother's old rocking chair in the window of his front room, praying for Teresa to walk down the street. He doesn't think he can bear a life all on his own. At 3 o'clock, some men came to fix the porch roof of the house next door, except nobody lives there anymore. Errol opened the top window of his front room to let in the smell of the burning tar. He likes the smell, but in the end he had to shut the window because it reminded him of Teresa. She couldn't bear the smell. At 4 he made tea, 2 mugs instead of 1, and he put out ginger biscuits even though he doesn't like them. He's been eating them for 15 years and never said a word. The men went away, but they left the tar burning in a small tin drum over a calorie ring. Just half an hour ago, a man in a donkey jacket came along to check everything. He went away and left the ring burning still. Errol wanted to ask him why, but he didn't have the nerve. He thinks something might be afoot, so he turns off the lights and gets a blanket to spread over his legs. He turns the radio right down and dials the number for Ledengate Station. He lets it ring once, then hangs up, rests his finger lightly on the redial button. Later, drifting in and out of a troubled sleep, Errol wakes. Thinking he can hear somebody knocking on his front door, he draws his knees up to his chest, feels his body tighten. His head pounds, and he thinks he hears steps fading away. He waits, musters the courage to go to the window, and peers through the gap in the curtains. He sees 2 people disappearing, and thinks they are police, but he's not sure. He checks the doors are locked, front and back, and resumes his position in the chair. On the hour, Capital Radio tells him that the attacks on sex offenders on and around the lime kiln have abated. Men have been apprehended, and order is, for now, being restored. Smethurst is already in the Steels when Staffe gets there, and before he can say what he wants, Smethurst gives the barmaid a wink and puts up 2 fingers. 2 halves of bitter arrive together with 2 large Jamesons. She is the same barmaid who served Staffe and Josie the other day. She fixes her hair, puts a hand on her hip and smiles. "You get it in the neck from Pennington about the Leanne Colquhoun story?" says Smethurst. "I can handle it." "And what about a complaint from that gang? I heard the PCA are involved." "That's my business." "Word is the Montefiore and Colquhoun cases will be with AMIP before the weekend's out." "No chance. I'm getting there." The AMIP rumour, the Area Major Investigation Pool, is news to Staffe. He downs his scotch in one. "How'd you make that out?" "Some victim support group and a bunch of people with rock-solid alibis. Everybody knows each other. Even Ross Dennis, Carl Colquhoun's workmate, is Leanne Colquhoun's cousin. And we've had him in for beating up a supposed sex offender." "He's got an alibi, right?" Staffe thinks about Sally Watkins and Johnson's cock-up over the corroboration of her alibi. He doesn't want her to become a real suspect. "How's Johnson bearing up?" asks Smethurst. "Why do you ask?" "He's got mates at the Met. I hear he's got problems at home. Word is he's struggling. And that young pup, too." "There's nothing wrong with Pulford." You can't be too loyal, you know, Staffe. I'm not too anything, says Staffe. Course not. Smethurst clinks glasses, says chin-chin, drains his beer and throws his head back, laughing. I'll drink to moderation. Bastard, says Staffe, following suit. Try not to think about the PCA and AMIP. You're a different man since you split up with that Sylvie. All uptight. Smethurst laughs again. Maybe being single doesn't suit you. The barmaid sets down another brace of braces. She smiles at Staffe. Ever since he went to see Jessup, this case has taken him back. Towards Sylvie. If he was to see her just once, and for old time's sake, it might somehow help the case. Staffe? Smethurst is looking straight at him, obviously talking to a deaf ear. Sorry, said Staffe. Hit a nerve, did I? I'm just going to make a call, says Staffe, getting up from the bar stool and making his way outside. It's coming up to last orders, but it's still warm out. Revellers spilling round the bench tables. He scrolls down through calls received. Sylvie comes up, and his thumb makes contact with the green call button. But just as he applies the telling degree of pressure, the handset vibrates in his hand, and he gets the incoming call. Here's his sister's voice. What's wrong, Marie? Nothing. Nothing at all is wrong. It's exactly the opposite. What is it? I wish Mum and Dad could be here. Have you been drinking? Well, I've had a couple, but what do you want? Paolo's asked me to marry him. Are you mad? I think I am. I just wanted to say thanks for letting us have your place. Staffe clicks the phone dead and curses into the hot night. As he turns to go back into the pub, he thinks he hears someone shout his name. He spins round and looks up and down Haverstock Hill. There are some youths in a bus shelter on the other side of the road, but a bus pulls up. Staffe thinks they might be the E-gang. Then he thinks he's being paranoid. When the bus pulls away, the youths aren't there. He marches back into the pub, barging into a couple of youths by the door. They're holding bottles as if they're weapons, and says something he can't make out as he passes them. Fuck yourselves, he says, turning on them. They take a step back in formation. One of them looks familiar, but Staffe can't place him. When he gets back to the bar, Smethurst says, Jesus, looks like we're going to need a couple more. Get them in, says Staffe, looking towards the youths at the door, who have disappeared. When the Steels won't serve them any more, Staffe and Smethurst make their way out. They're the last by a long chalk, and in the middle stages of disrepair. As she makes the way to a minicab, the barmaid gives Staffe a friendly pat on the back. Look after yourself, sweetheart, she says. I can look after you too, he says. I'm a policeman, see? I don't think you mean that, she says, smiling. She gets in the minicab and it pulls away, past a group of youths hanging around in the car park. Even though he's half cut, Staffe recognises two of them from the pub. They smirk, and another youth appears from the back of the group. The one who claims Staffe stabbed him outside the Ragamuffin. Shit, says Staffe, instinctively feeling the cut on his wrist. What's going on? Says Smethurst. It's that shitbag who's got me up on that PCA. Leave this to me. Staffe takes a step towards the gang, shrugs off Smethurst's attempt to restrain him. What the hell do you want with me? And how do you want it? 2 or 3 of you will get it, you know that. He looks them each in the eye one by one, and when a bottle gets thrown from the back, smashing at his feet, he knows he has a chance. That's a coward's move, a gang mindset. He plants his feet, shakes his arms down and turns his palms to face them, as if to say, "Come on." The gang mumble to each other, and Smethurst moves alongside Staffe, says, "And the rest of you will bang up. I've seen you. All I need is to call up your file and your girlfriends will be in line too. It's an offence to pimp your girlfriends, boys." "Whoa, you can't say that, no way, man. This is harassment." "Who threw the bottle?" The youth from the other night is smirking. He says, "We're not causing no trouble, man. When we bring you trouble, you won't see or hear us, pussy." Staffe takes a step forward and the youth doesn't flinch. The gang gathers tight around him, and Staffe thinks he hears the metallic shift and lock of a gun being braced. His heart misses a beat, and his legs go weak. Smethurst must have heard it too, because he whispers, "Fuck off out of here. Now." The youth smiles as he sees police bravado turn to mush. The law just hasn't got the weaponry these days, and he takes a step forward. "Don't think Jada's going to lie down and take your white justice. We know about Kelly, man. Don't matter if it's from his brief or his brethren. Things will come level." The gang take a step up, and Staffe feels Smethurst tug at his jacket. Beyond the gang, a car swerves across the road. Its lights come straight at them, and Staffe holds his breath, not knowing which way to jump. The youth looks round, and the gang follow suit. "Fuck, man!" The car's brakes screech, and it mounts the curb between the gang and Staffe. He recognises the MR2, and although Pulford calls for them to get in, bloody get in, the gang have begun their retreat. Staffe squeezes in behind the front seats, and Smethurst gets in the front. As they tear off in the cram-packed Toyota, a missile hits the boot. "Shit," says Pulford. "I hope that's covered on police insurance." "Isn't it Mummy's car?" says Smethurst. "Do you want to walk?" says Pulford. Then, under his breath, "You fat bastard." "What the hell were you doing there?" says Staffe. "There's something I need you to see," says Pulford. "But how did you know I'd be there?" "I'm supposed to be a detective, remember?" They dropped Smethurst at the Boss Clef and carried on up to Pulford's flat in Southgate, with Staffe recounting the run-in with the E-gang. "If you don't mind me saying, sir, maybe you'd be better off not drinking, with everything that's going on." He pulls the car up sharp, pulls into a parking space. Staffe looks up at the grey-rendered interwar semi, with its red-tiled half-hexagon bay window on a long, curving street, all the same, and says, "You live here." "I just mean I thought you'd live somewhere else, I suppose." "Somewhere hip?" Pulford locks the car up and ushers Staffe towards his front door. "There's plenty you don't know. Wait till you see this." Inside, Pulford shows Staffe up the stairs and into his first-floor flat. In the small living room there is a blue-grey glow from a computer screen, but Pulford heads straight to the tiny galley kitchen and puts the kettle on. He makes the coffee strong and hands it to Staffe. "I don't need to sober up, you know." "I didn't say you did." He logs on to the internet. Staffe picks up his coffee and sits alongside Pulford, watching the web make itself available. Every 4 seconds, someone hits a child porn site. Did you know that? Yeah, I told you, says Pulford, busy with the mouse, taking the cursor round the screen double-quick with the speed of youth. Staffe blinks, trying to keep up. The coffee makes him grimace. Now, look at this. Pulford leans back in his chair, blows out his cheeks. Just look at this. Jesus, says Staffe, what is it? The screen is cut into 4 segments. Top right is the photograph of Carl Colquhoun. Bottom left is Montefiore. Bottom right is a blur that Staffe can't make sense of, but in the top left quadrant is an image which Staffe has never seen before. It is a face he feels he should know, but doesn't. You don't recognise her? Top left, says Pulford. I do, and I don't. The woman's face is hard and pale. Her hair is blonde, the skin grey. Her eyes are closed, but pain is written all over her still features. I'm pretty sure this is an autopsy photograph. See the slab in the background? It's not. It's Lottie Stenson, sir. What the hell is this site? Look, says Pulford, pointing to the web address at the top of the page. VengeanceVictims.com. Victims, says Staffe. Vaber, says Pulford. What's going on in this bottom right section? I can't make sense of it, but I think that's the point. It's not decided yet. Oh, my God, says Staffe. They want us to see it here first, sir. It's going to be a live execution. Can you find out where this site is coming from? I've got a techie working on it, but I didn't know if you wanted it to get back to Pennington. Staffe's pocket vibrates. The telephone screen tells him he has missed calls, Sylvie and Pennington. He curses under his breath and calls Pennington. Even though it's nearly midnight, his boss sounds bright as a button. Ah, Staffe, you've got one hell of a sense of timing. I'm sorry it's so late, sir. No, I was about to call you. I need to see you at the station. We got a problem. Quite a problem. And there's something I need to tell you, sir, about a website. VengeanceSomething.com? What? We've got the news to thank, Will. I've got Nicholas Absalom here with me now. They're being civilised about the whole thing, Will. Very civilised. But I would like you to get here as soon as you can. Absolutely as soon as you can. Pennington hangs up, and Staffe can imagine him showing a brave face to Absalom, the forced smile straining to break into a snarl. Suddenly, Staffe feels the booze catching up. Nick Absalom is heroin-thin in a skinny-fit Paul Smith suit, legs crossed in the manner of a faux intellectual, and his hooded eyes slightly shut. He talks through a pursed superior smile and regularly reinstates the centre parting of his fop's hair with a slow sweep of his left hand. He says, I have to tell you, Inspector Wagstaff, I think this should be our front page. He reaches into the pocket of his suit jacket and unfolds a tabloid-sized piece of paper with a photograph of the website and a headline. Murder while you watch. Underneath the image of the website is the strapline. Britain's first snuffcast. Staffe takes the sample page from Absalom and scrutinises it. He swallows his pride, says to Absalom, It's good of you to pull it. In the public interest. It's not in the public interest, says Absalom. Pennington sighs. You know how incendiary it is out there. How did you get hold of this anyway? I'm an investigator, just as much as you are. Don't flatter yourself, Absalom. Staffe! Shouts Pennington. Staffe scans the front page mock-up. Child rapists drop like flies as vigilantes cut and crucify their way through London's long, hot summer. But what should the police do? If you were a copper in a world where the guilty are set free and the innocent are left to a slow, slow death, what would you do? Just ask yourself. He looks long and hard at Absalom, who stares him down in turn. Neither man gives an inch. Neither blinks. Pennington sucks hard on a plastic cigarette. Eventually the silence snaps. Absalom says, Say what you like, the public have a right to know. I'm only representing conventional wisdom. Isn't it convenient that it just happens to be raising your profile? Climbing over dead bodies to get yourself onto the ladder. How gallant of you. Are you talking about the bodies of child molesters set free by the state? Well, I do apologise. Maybe we should do more to protect the likes of Carl Calhoun and Guy Montefiore and Lottie Stenson. Lottie Stenson? How do you know about her? I don't doubt that you're probably quite good at your job, Inspector Wagstaff, but that's not to say I can't be too. She's right there in the top left corner of the web page. It's not rocket science. How exactly did you get hold of that web address? Oh, we're a long way from me having to tell you that. And you'd have to disprove that I happened to simply stumble across it. Staffe looks back at the front page, reads again about the slow death of the victims, and wonders how Absalom might know about Vaber. You should thank Mr. Absalom, Will, says Pennington. This has brought us some time to regroup. Regroup, thinks Staffe, fearing the worst. Will you be reassigning the case, Chief Inspector? Says Absalom. You did say we could have first run with the next big break on the case. This will be a start. You're nothing but a muckraker, says Staffe. I am simply establishing a debate about the nature of guilt and innocence. You're inciting anarchy. And the release of known sex offenders into the community, simply because the pursuit of justice doesn't meet your budget, doesn't contribute to anarchy? Absalom snatches the front page off Staffe and stands up. He's not smug. He looks genuinely angry, and slowly folds the page back, sliding it into his pocket. You were lucky this time. He looks at Pennington. If this had anything to do with justice, anything at all, you'd be choking on my words over your cornflakes tomorrow morning. Now, can I assume that this case is being reassigned? Pennington nods. He gives Staffe a resigned look. Detective Inspector Wagstaff will remain attached to the case, but it is now under the control of AMIP. The Area Major Investigation Pool. Who will be in charge? D.I. Smethurst. Of the Met. And where will it be based? Hammersmith. What would you like to say to my readers should they ask why it took so long for the Met to take the lead on this case? Synergy, interrupts Staffe. Evidence has emerged connecting the murder of Carl Calhoun to a case which the Met allowed to lapse 3 years ago. You can ask Smethurst if you want any more. Staffe watches Absalom shake Pennington's hand and leave. So, I'm off the case, then. Like I said, Smethurst will run the AMIP squad. I've just had another run-in with the E-Gang. I told you they know all about Sohan Kelly. He's untouchable. Untouchable? Don't fuck with me, Staffe. You can go. Staffe makes his way down through the building into the night. As he goes, he looks through the windows. Outside it is black, pin-pricked with bits of life going on all over the city. Sunday morning. "Did you sleep in those clothes, sir?" says Josie, in the entrance to the Queen's Terrace flat. She's holding a brown paper bag and a copy of the Sunday News. Staffe rubs the sleep from his eyes and goes back into the flat. Calls out, "Don't just stand there, come in." In the kitchen, he puts mound after mound of coffee beans into his grinder. The machine roars, and Staffe rubs his temples with his free hand, then takes a slug of water from a Guinness pint pot. "Do you want one?" he says, holding a white china mug up. Josie nods and gives him a curious look, as if to say, "You're supposed to be pissed off." "What will you do now Smethurst is in charge?" "It's not about being in charge. It's about catching this person before they get to whoever is in the bottom right-hand corner of that web page." He jabs his finger at the News' front page. "What have the photo analysts said about the images?" "Anybody could set the website up. It's a 10 quid standard web camera lens. But get this, the original location where the domain address was bought was Guy Montefiore's computer. It was his landline." "And they used his credit cards too," says Staffe. "Yes." "Where's the transmission coming from?" "The image is too blurred. They reckon they've got some kind of gauze over the lens. But the techies think it might be a building, an outside shot. And it's in our time zone. It came light the same time as London." "Gauze." Staffe downs the rest of the pint of water, pours himself another. "What are you up to today?" "It's Sunday, but I don't suppose I have any say in the matter." "How do you fancy breaking and entering?" Staffe taps the back of a chair at the kitchen table, inviting Josie to sit down. "I'm going to grab a quick shower, then we'll get off." "What you going to do about Montefiore?" "Montefiore? Why would I do anything about him?" "Ah," says Josie. She looks at her feet, clearly embarrassed. "What's happened? Josie?" "Last night, just after 11, he was attacked in his bed at the hospital. A porter disturbed them, but they got away." "The bastards! Pennington didn't say a bloody word. I was with him last night. To sod them. Sod them all." As he goes into his bedroom, Josie can hear him banging and cursing. Then a mobile phone rings and the place falls silent. Staffe speaks and closes the door, and Josie is left to drink her coffee in a resounding lull. Staffe's heart beats double time. "I don't really know," he says. His stomach turns slowly, super slow-mo. He sits on the edge of the bath and takes a deep breath, feet tapping 16 beats to the bar. "What made you call me?" says Sylvie. He stares blankly at the wall and sees the tiles as if for a first time. They're cheap and white, but the border course is handmade from Cordoba. He bought it from a shop in Acton when he first got the flat. When Sylvie saw the tiles, she asked if they were his choice and said he had taste. "Well, that's obvious," he had said, running his hand up her back, pulling her towards him. "The Cordoban tiles are still here." "What?" "I'm in the bathroom, V." Will, you're being weird. You said you liked the tiles, and I said, have you been drinking? You're not drinking again, are you, Will? I haven't had a drink all day. Will, I'm joking. The line goes quiet, and he thinks he can hear her sniff. She says, I said you had taste, and you said that was obvious. You touched me. I have to go, Will. I need to see you, that's all. Will. The phone goes quiet. Just hearing her voice transports him back through the years. His words stick like a nervous kiss. What is it? He says. If you wanted to see me, you should have just said. She says the time and place, and the phone goes quiet again. Staffe summons the courage, takes a deep breath and says, Sometimes I really miss you, V. But the line is dead. He can't fathom whether she heard him or not. Staffe and Josie drive east along Embankment. The sun is low and golden, casts long shadows down the road to Westminster. It could make you believe in a yellow brick road. The queues for the Tate are already snaking down towards the river promenade. Staffe wishes that just once he could have an ordinary Sunday morning that took in the papers and a gallery, a late long lunch in a dark pub on the river, and then a 50s film or the cricket highlights. Instead, he hangs a right at the Albert Bridge and winds his way against the traffic onto Kennington Lane. Josie says, It's over there, above the estate agents. Take a right after the pizza place. It leads up to Cleaver Square. I used to have a boyfriend who lived there. We can get in the back way. Staffe wants to know about the boyfriend, why they split up. Was he good to her? Maybe she cheated on him. Here. Just here, she says. Staffe parks, peruses his catch-all ring of keys. The back way in is easy enough. The entrance to a block of flats juts out, and he obscures himself in its nook while he heaves himself up, scuffing his shoes as he clambers. He scrapes his shin on the ridge bricks, but with a final effort he is over. The padlock on the gate is standard, and Staffe soon finds a key on the ring that unlocks it. He lets Josie in and slides back the bolt. Steel stairs lead to the first floor, and as they climb, Cleaver Square comes into view. People walking dogs or sitting on the benches, lolling in pairs at the tables of the pub that's not open yet. The higher they get, the more Staffe and Josie are exposed. Staffe knows if he's caught, he'll not just be off the case. Suddenly he feels weak. The first key he tries doesn't get close, so he has to bend down, look into the aperture of the lock, then inspect the keys. Staffe! Hisses Josie. He puts the key to the lock and it goes all the way in, but it's too late. Below, a man with a dog on the other side of the road has stopped while his dog takes a shit. He calls up, "Breaking in, are we? I should call the police." He's smiling. Staffe calls out, "We are police, and if you don't clear that shit up, I'll have you doing community service." The man's smile goes, and he looks down forlorn at the pile his dog has just produced. Staffe turns the key and pushes the door open. He looks down, watches the man scurry away, leaving the dog's mess for somebody else to cope with. Inside, 3 doors lead off the dark corridor with its threadbare brown carpet. The place is musty, and Staffe opens the doors as he goes. There is a small kitchenette with 2 bugs in the washing-up bowl, then a toilet, and finally a large room with 2 floor-to-ceiling windows looking down on Kennington Lane. "This place hasn't been used for months," says Josie. "Let's hope it's not been used since Vaba were here." He looks through the drawers of a cheaply veneered reproduction desk. "You check the filing cabinet." The drawers of the desk are empty, save a few paper clips and some dog-eared menus to the local takeaways. "I've got a bad feeling, sir." Josie drapes a short suede jacket on the back of a velour wingback. It slips off, unnoticed. Staffe picks up the phone and gets a dead line. There's an old fax machine on a low table, but it has no papers, in or out. "There's nothing at all in these," says Josie. "What a waste of time," he says, looking at the desk. In its left pedestal are 3 drawers. He crouches down, pulls the empty drawer out completely and sets it down on the floor. "What you doing?" Staffe gets down on his knees and reaches into the drawer's void with his outstretched hand, dragging his cupped palm back towards him. He feels scraps of paper on the rough plywood. The detritus will have fallen down the back of the drawer when it was once overloaded, and he scoops it out. As he sits cross-legged on the floor, Josie stands by the window, pulls the dirty nets to one side and looks down for danger. The pile of papers comprise yet more menus and an A5 Vaba flyer, a tube map of London, and a child's picture of their school with matchstick figures waving and big yellow smiles on their faces. There is also a telephone bill from 2006. He flips through the pages quickly and sees that the bill is itemised. He smiles to himself and slides it into the inside pocket of his jacket. Finally, there is the torn wedge of chequebook stubs. He puts the stubs into his hip pocket and stands up, slides the drawer back into his void and says, "Nothing. Let's go." They leave quickly, closing all the doors as they go. Josie peers through the narrow gap of the cagily opened outside door. Down below, standing outside the gate, are 2 men in suits, looking up. They see Josie, and she gasps. "What is it?" "There's 2 men down there. They saw me. I think they're waiting for us." "Shit." He sighs and opens the door, shows Josie through. He follows her down the iron steps, raising a hand to the waiting men and sussing out who they are. He slides the bolt of the gate and goes onto the street, extending a hand to the older of the 2 men. "Wonderful day." The man takes his hand, but before he can say anything, Staffe says, "You're from the estate agency." He looks the man right in the eye and smiles. "You don't remember me? We used to be the tenants, just looking for a copy of the old lease." "Ah, right," says the older man. "We thought we'd better check," says the younger one, looking Josie up and down, fidgeting with his tie. "Better safe than sorry," says Staffe, thinking how desperate for business these poor souls must be working on Sunday. "I thought we had all the keys," says the older man. Staffe taps his pocket. "The lawyers said to give them back to them. They need to do an inventory." He crosses the street and waves a hand at them as he goes, walking past his car. He keeps going towards the square, touching the cheque stubs, and considers a good thing he could do. "Will," says Marie, standing back from the Kilburn doorway and opening her arms, inviting him to hug her. She is beaming all over her face, and for a moment, as she wraps her arms around him, he surrenders to the softness of her small body. Her head nestles in the crook of his neck and shoulder as she squeezes him. "I can't say how glad I am. How pleased I am about you letting us use your place." She stands back and holds him, still by the hips. "Come and say hello to Paolo." "Marie, there's something I need to do." He puts a hand in his jacket, fingers the fat cheque he's come to give her. Me too. She holds his hand and leads him into the lounge. He can smell drink in her wake, even though it's not yet midday. The sun streams into the lounge. Takeaway cartons litter the coffee table, and there is a bottle of vodka on the floor by Paolo's chair, which is Staffe's chair. The man who once beat his sister is sitting, one leg draped casually over the other and rolling a cigarette, in Staffe's chair. It is an American-style spoonback he paid $200 for 15 years ago. Hi, Paolo. Staffe tries not to stare at the yellowing bruises. Dude, says Paolo, without getting up. Staffe wants to tell him to be careful with his cigarettes on the chair, but he thinks twice. Then he says, Watch those cigarettes on the chair. Will, it's valuable. Don't be like this, says Marie. No worries, man, says Paolo. His yellowed eyes hood down, heavy, and even though he is clearly Southern European, he has an affected New World upwards intonation to his speech. I'm not being like anything, Marie. Marie retreats towards the door and beckons Staffe to follow her. Can't you see we're happy? She hisses. Can't you be happy for us? I'd like nothing more, says Staffe. He takes hold of her hands with his and squeezes them softly. Really? Believe me, I just worry about you. It sounds like you're worrying about your furniture. He takes hold of the cuff of a loose-fitting, bright and swirly, long-sleeved hippie blouse and runs his hand up along her arm. The sleeve of the blouse ruches up, shows her pale, naked arm. He holds the sleeve up with his left hand, and with the right he touches the yellowing bruise. These didn't come from the good fairy, he says. I don't know what you're trying to say, Will, but he loves me and I love him. If you don't want us here, we'll go. I didn't say that. Sometimes, Will... His mobile rings. It's Josie, and he decides to ignore it. I'm happy for you, Marie. Honestly, I am. I just know what... And I know what you're like, Will. You're not exactly a role model when it comes to relationships, are you? He wants to tell her that he wishes he'd done more to help her when their parents were killed. He wants to have someone else to blame for the way she has turned out. Marie... He hears a whoosh, and something hits him on the head, something soft. At the top of the stairs, Harry is standing with his hands above his head, as if he has scored the winning goal at Wembley. Staffe holds out his arms, and as Harry runs down the stairs, he drops to his knees. Harry launches himself from the 5th step, and Staffe catches him. He holds his nephew tight, and hears his own words vibrate on the boy's head, as he says into his ear, You look after your mummy, Harry. Look after your mummy. He knows that if he gives her the money, Paolo will blow some of it. But he also knows that some of it will make things better for her and Harry. He cradles Harry in one arm and stands up, pulls out the cheque. I want you to have this, Marie. Here, take it. Please. She looks at it, trying to be casual, but her eyes go wide. She narrows them as soon as she can. It's too much, Will. It's for you and Harry. But not Paolo. I'd better go. I'm trying to make us a family, Will. Say goodbye to Paolo. Staffe looks back into the room, sees Paolo burning a corner of his hash resin. He's got other things on his mind, says Staffe. And as he lets himself out, he can hear Marie sounding off at Paolo. He chastises himself for stirring things up, then chastises himself for not stirring things up more. He makes a quick prayer that his sister comes to no harm and clicks open the car. But before he can get in, his mobile goes off again. He answers without looking. "Hi, Josie." "It's not Josie," says Pulford. "We've had some bad news. Nico Cashel tried to top himself last night. They've been asking what we said to him, saying we should have told them to put him on suicide alert." Staffe looks back up at the flat and wonders what damage he might be leaving in his wake. He gets in the car. "How did you find out?" "The governor rang me. We're on Cashel's visits list." "Nobody else knows?" "Not yet." "I'll tell Pennington. You say nothing." He shuts down his mobile phone and turns off his police radio, leans back in the Peugeot's driving seat and rests his head. He closes his eyes and breathes deep. In, out. Deeper. In, out. He pictures the air in his lungs burning clean, burning to a shining silver, and his pulse slows further until he opens his eyes, looks at the Vaber phone bill. The only number he recognises is Deborah Bowker's. The call was made 18 months ago, not necessarily sinister. As he drives, he takes out the cheque stubs, flicks through, wondering if he needs a trace putting on the account. Pulling onto the high road, with the winos and Sunday shoppers stumbling and milling, he puts the brakes on, pulls in. The car behind blares its horn, swerves and gives him the V's, but Staffe doesn't care. He's looking at the blue-black fountain ink figure of 50,000 on one of the cheque stubs. Underneath is a single letter, J. The date is the 20th of September 2005, a week before Nico Cashel reputedly killed Lottie Stenson. "You look like shit, Rick," says Josie. Johnson holds the mug of tea in both hands. He looks like death warmed up. They're in a cafe opposite Smithfield Market, just round the corner from Ledengate. It's old school, from the days before the media and city types took the area over with their awful eateries and gastro shacks. "Thanks, Josie. I feel a lot better for that." "How are the kids? Still keeping you on your toes?" "Smethurst gave me a ring, says he wants me on board the AMIP ship. You too?" Josie nods. "And what about Staffe?" Josie studies her empty cup of coffee, bites her lip. "What is it, Josie? What's he done now?" "I need to get hold of him. I think I might have dropped a bollock." "Tell me." She takes a deep breath. "We broke into some premises and I left my jacket there." "Which premises?" "You've heard him talk about Vaber." "He's still barking at that tree, is he?" "We didn't find anything. You won't tell Pennington, will you? Or Smethurst?" For a moment he has a devilish glint in his eye. Then the tiredness bites back. "You know, Josie, you can tell me if he's dragging you deeper than you want to go. I can help." "It's not dragging me deeper that worries me. I think he might be going out on his own." "Upriver," says Johnson, mainly to himself. He looks outside and a slow cloud rolls a shadow over the market. He can't remember the last time he saw a cloud in this stifling summer. He shivers, pulls the jacket across his chest, and calls for the bill. Prison Sundays are bad news. It is 23-hour bang-up for everybody bar Christians. And as he is shown across the yard to the new healthcare wing, Staffe sees a gaggle of the prison faithful slouching towards the chapel, all smoking and with an effortless profanity on the tips of their tongues. Surprising how popular God can be. Thank God for his next door. He could have been a lot worse, says the duty governor. Staffe feels a pang of guilt for the prints he left on Nico Cachel's desperate prison life. I'd like to speak to his next door. Wedlock? The governor shoots a wry smile. It doesn't quite work like that, Inspector. Maybe we can arrange an interview some other time. The governor flicks the keys from his pocket and catches them in mid-air. He selects one from a ring of many and twists as he puts it to the lock and kicks open the heavy steel door. He does the whole thing without breaking his stride. Staffe wonders how many tens of thousands of times a year he does the same thing. He's up and with it, says the governor, but I can't let you have more than 10 minutes. He's weak. How did he do it? Hang and slash. He meant it all right. The inmates call it double bubble. You hitch up to the top of the window, plaited sheet around the neck, and then you slash up along the wrist with 2 safety blades wedged in a toothbrush, and kick the chair away. Bleed as you swing. Luckily for Cashel, Wedlock was listening out, heard him saying a prayer. We reckon he must have sounded the alarm even before Cashel slashed up. Not exactly a cry for help, you'd say. Oh, no, says the governor, striding into the hospital reception, picking up the visitor's book and scanning down as he shows Staffe to Cachel's bedside with a slow sweep of the arm. He hands Staffe a pen and indicates where to sign the book. 10 minutes. There's an alarm bell above each bed and an officer back on reception. And he's gone. Cashel has dark rings around his eyes and dressings on each of his wrists. Can't you leave me in peace? Didn't your blessed revenge bring you the peace you thought it would, Nico? You wouldn't know the half. Or is that it, Nico? Is it only half the story when you take someone's life? Once they've gone, you can't forgive them, can you? Is that what you really want? To forgive? To let their hate go? Quite the philosopher, aren't you? Cashel is propped up in bed, his head on plumped pillows and a half-drunk glass of blackcurrant juice on the bedside table. A CCTV camera is fixed to the ceiling. Or maybe I should be asking these questions of the person who actually killed Lotte Stenson. You are. Last time we talked, you wished you could bring her back. Cashel has a picture of Nicoletta next to the glass of juice. She smiles out at them. Looking at the picture, he says, It can't be right to make yourself as bad as the people who do the bad things. You're not a bad man, Nico. And that's the problem. Staffe thinks about what he's heard. Yourselves, not yourself. Cashel looks down at his bandaged wrists. His jaw goes weak and his bottom lip trembles. It seems as though he has to summon a last drop to raise his eyes. His voice is weak. If there is a loving God, he must love the badness in us just as much as the goodness. How can we live in such a world? Who is Jay, Nico? What are you talking about? Someone you might have paid to help you. I don't know. There were no signs of a forced entry to Stenson's house. It was a professional job, or someone she knew, someone she trusted. You didn't know her, did you, Nico? How did you restrain her? She's a woman. Did you tie her up? It was a long time ago. Where did you get the chloroform from, Nico? Shut up! And the hammer? Which hand did you start on? Nurse! It's okay, Nico. A nurse appears in the doorway, and Staffe stands up. It's okay, he says to the nurse. He waits for her to come forward, to stop him upsetting her patient any more, but she doesn't. Instead, she crosses her arms under her breasts and nods her head, mouths the words, "Go on." It doesn't make you a bad man to have not killed her. It doesn't make you a better man to be in here doing someone else's time. You have to be with your daughter. Don't you think she needs you? Cashel drags the back of his bandaged arm across his face, wipes away some of the tears. As he does it, Staffe sees smears of blood where the wound has leaked. If there's anything you want to tell me, Nico, anything at all, you call me. Don't hesitate. It can't be any worse than this. That shows how much you don't know. I'd like you to go, Inspector. The nurse shows Staffe towards a small waiting room with a steel door. She's in her early 20s and has a mop of auburn hair twisted into a trendy confection with long strands curling down to frame her face. She has the greenest eyes. "There's something I feel I have to tell you," she says, looking up and down the corridor before closing the door, locking them in. She plays with the strands of her hair and wraps an arm across her own waist. "Inmates all have a story about how they've been abused by the system. Some are stitched up by the police or grasped by a friend. Some say they're innocent. But he's the first I've come across who swears he's guilty. You can see he's lying just the same." She goes to the window and nods to another nurse. "There's someone you should talk to. It'll have to be quick." She works the magic with her keys and opens the door, takes a step back to let in a fearsome bulk of pasty white menace. "This is Wedlock. Billy Wedlock." Wedlock is about the same age as Nurse Louisa, but is far from her in every other respect. He has prison tats all up his arms, and even one on his forehead, done with needles and burning matches and biro ink. Staff's guess is he's been jailbirding all his life. One step ahead, Wedlock laughs at Staffe. "You checking the tats, man? Got me for a jailie, yeah, but you be wrong, man. This just where I belong now. That's what society wants, that's what society gets. They want me down the gym and beefing up and mixing with these evil fuckers teaching me the business for when I get out. That's what Billy's doing, man. I'm learning the language. I'm graduating." He looks at the nurse and says, "Miss, you not told him what I done, miss?" She shakes her head. "Just cleaning the streets, just like Nico wants. Except I know he's not clean no streets. He's just fucked himself over, man. He done nothing for real." "He told you?" "Like the cat sat on the fucking mat, man. He told me straight up." "And you'll testify to that?" "No way, man. What do you think I am?" "But he told you. Maybe he wants to be discovered." "No, it wasn't like that. He just had to get it out of his mind like a priest thing in the what you say, confessional." "So why are you telling me?" "Cashel has to do any more time, he'll die, man. And he's a good man, a proper good man." "What exactly did he say to you, Billy, to make you believe him?" Wedlock looks at the nurse, and she nods for him to go ahead. She looks anxiously through the reinforced glass up and down the corridor. "I mashed some man proper. He was fiddling some kids of a woman I knew. Just a neighbour, but I'd heard her crying. I couldn't get it out of my head. Well, she was marrying him, fuck's sakes." Wedlock is pacing up and down the small room, pressing up to the glass and looking left and right. He turns on Staffe and gives him a look to kill. "He's not putting his dirty prick near no one, man, you get me?" "And you told all this to Cashel?" "I heard he was in for the same beef. But he wouldn't talk, man. Over and over he'd listen to me tell what I served that perv." "And what else did he tell you, Billy?" Wedlock shakes his head and punches one open palm with the fist of the other. I swore down I wouldn't tell. He told you he didn't do it, Billy. I'm saying nothing, man. He shoots the nurse a look, as if she has betrayed him. But she's having none of it. She takes a step towards him and plants her feet, puts her hands on her hips. It was you that came to me, Billy. It's me who's sticking her stupid neck out here. Wedlock hangs his head, says, quiet as a church mouse, Sorry, miss. You don't always have to blame, Billy. Did he tell you who did it, Billy? Who killed Lotte Stenson? Wedlock shakes his head, sadly defiant, without looking up. I'm not asking you to tell me who. Just did he tell you who killed Stenson? He shakes his head again, and the nurse works her key magic, pulls open the door and shows Wedlock out, reaching up to give him a pat on his shoulder as he goes. Pulford watches Staffe on his video entry phone. He looks all washed out, bags under his eyes, unshaved, grey-skinned. He lets him in and kicks a pizza box under the sofa, puts all the newspapers into one pile. He turns off the game, even though he's got too much on Ashton for the first goal. He boots his computer and opens the door. How can you live like this? Says Staffe, striding into the room. You want a coffee or something? I might catch something. Pulford shrugs and flops into his armchair, lets his arms dangle to the floor and stretches his legs out, waving a hand casually towards the sofa. He smiles to himself as Staffe sits down, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, unable to relax. From where he is, he can see the debris of too many weekends on the floor, less than a foot below Staffe's backside. He nods at the computer. Just keeping track of the victim site. Any change to the fourth quadrant? No. You're not going across to AMIP? Smethurst doesn't want me. I'll have a word. It doesn't matter. It does, and I will. Pulford hands Staffe a sheet with those names appearing on both the case's database and the VABA telephone bill. Any key names? Pulford smiles and begins to read the highlighted names from the sheets. Deborah Bowker. We knew that. Tyrone Watkins. You'd expect that. Delilah Spears. Spears. Isn't that, Staffe rubs his face hard. The match comes from the transcript of Deborah Bowker's interview. That's it. Bowker thought she was a bit strange. Poor Delilah, remembers Pulford. He flicks through the transcript. Her daughter was raped, poor Delilah. She wanted to go out and kill the bastards. That's why I left, truth be known. I'd have ended up doing time when it should have been him. Have we interviewed Delilah? Johnson cleared her. Staffe looks at the dead TV. You not watching the game? I might later. Pulford takes a deep breath and studies Staffe's face for the next reaction. Jessup was on the list, sir. Jessup? There's one call to Ledengate and two later ones to his home number. Jessup? Staffe's face tightens and his bottom lip whirls. He never mentioned he had spoken to Vaber. They called him. Maybe it was when they were dropping the charges, when Ruth Merritt let the case lapse. I checked the dates. The second two, yes. The first, to Ledengate, was a couple of days before the CPS wound the case back in. Jay, says Staffe, as much to himself as Pulford. Sir? Staffe looks at him, as though he is a doorman deciding whether he is good enough to be allowed in. He makes a tight smile and shakes his head. Nothing. Maybe I will have that coffee. We are honoured. Pulford puts the kettle on, and while it boils, he tidies up a mess of poker chips on the small circular dining table. It's all the rage now, says Staffe. I've been playing for years. Playing for money, too? The way you play football with a ball. He can feel Staffe weighing him up, so he adopts a casual air. You should join us for a game one night. Maybe when this case is done and dusted. You can have a life and a job, sir. I beg to differ. You're young. And I don't care enough. I didn't say that. Pulford puts a dessert spoon of own-brand coffee granules into the chipped mug. You know, sometimes I think it was a godsend. Me working for you. You're, He busies himself putting the milk in, stirring the coffee. Carry on, Sergeant. Well, sometimes it's like you're the antidote, an extreme. A lesson in how to go too far. You're so wound up all the time. Staffe is gazing into nowhere. Eventually, Staffe takes a sip from his coffee and looks at the papers. Says, Thanks for doing this. Don't think it's not appreciated. I'll have that word with Smethurst. He's way out of line. It's only a case, sir. Staffe gives him a rueful look and drops his gaze. He stares at Pulford's feet, then gets up, shows himself out without saying another word. When he's gone, Pulford bends forward, sees one of his bank statements on the floor under his chair. Bottom line, 11.5 grand overdrawn. Staffe sits behind the wheel, closes his eyes and sees the numbers on Pulford's bank statement, the look on his DS's face when he spoke of his poker. He turns the ignition. Jessup once told him that we are defined by our faults. No problem, no person, he said. Bloody Jessup, says Staffe aloud, and he swings the car round in the direction of his old boss's home. He tries desperately to remember if his father had ever supplied him with such maxims for life, but he can't. At a red light, Staffe checks the stub again, making sure the J couldn't be another letter, a twitchy T, a lazy L, a straight S. There's no mistake. He rehearses the questions he will ask Jessup, but he can't make them sound casual, unthreatening, or remotely respectful. Do you think Nico Cashel didn't kill Lotte Stenson? Why did the CPS really drop the case? Why were Vaba calling you before and after Lotte Stenson was killed? At the station and at home? Who is the J on the Vaba check stubs? Can I see your bank statements? What were you doing on the night of the Lotte Stenson murder? And what were you doing on the night Carl Colquhoun was murdered, and the night Guy Montefiore was tortured? And can you prove it? Staffe parks up the road from Jessup's flat. He leans back against the car and squints up at his ex-boss's squalid abode. What has he done to the gods to deserve this case? If he doesn't ask these questions of Jessup, will Smethurst? Staffe knows he has no choice. There is already an innocent man serving life, and there is, Staffe is certain, another victim about to be added to the list of the dead and tortured. Jessup brought him up to do precisely this. He locks down the Peugeot and walks slowly up to the front door. He presses the top buzzer, still hoping a plausible and alternative truth will hit him with the rabbit punch. He takes a deep breath, closes his eyes, tries to see his way through to a brighter end. There is no answer, so Staffe stands back, looks up to the top flat and sees the curtains are half closed. He feels the bunch of keys still in his hip pocket from the Vaber sortie. And suddenly he feels sick. He's meeting Sylvie soon. As if, for the first time, he should go home, shower and get ready. It'll be the first time they've been out for dinner since he and Jessup were still friends. When Lotte Stenson was alive and Nico Cashel was a free man. When Carl Colquhoun and Guy Montefiore were leaving indelible prints all over the ruined lives of Tyrone, Linda and poor Sally Watkins. He looks up into the sun and says, "Come on!" aloud. Then goes back up to the door and presses all the buzzers, continuously, until someone berates him. "The fuck you playing at, police? Now let me in or I'll have you for—" The buzzer sounds, and the latch whirs itself unlocked. Staffe pushes it open and takes the ring of keys from his pocket, strides up the stairs. He smells the same old illegal smells, and notices that the rubbish bags outside the doors on the landings are piling up. When he gets to the top floor, he pounds the door. If only he could let himself in, rifle through his friend's possessions and find out what he needs to without having to ask. Ask? You may as well say accuse. Staffe waits. Weighs up the locks on the door. There are 3. To triple lock a top-floor flat in such a dismal block is abnormal. He looks closely at the wood around the middle lock and runs his finger around the pale, routed subsurface where the lock was fitted. It rubs rough on his finger, and he catches a splinter. It's a new fitting. Very new by the look and feel of it. He holds up the ring of keys and realizes, as he offers them to the new lock one by one, that none match. His heart sinks, and he knows Jessup must have something to hide. He knows, too, that he must get to Jessup before Smethurst. The least he can do for his old friend is hear it first, then react accordingly. Staffe knows he should go straight home and get ready for dinner with Sylvie, after all this time. But first there is just enough time for another trip down memory lane. Approaching the Scotsman's Pack, Staffe remembers the rollickings he used to get from Sylvie for the Sunday lunches he spent here with Jessup. Sunday dinner was the only meal she ever cooked. A bottle of aligoté for him, a brouilly for her. The wrong way round, some might say. Staffe opens the Scotsman's door and goes into the dark. The door slams violently behind him. As soon as you walk in through the panelled narrow corridor, you can feel the appeal. A handful of diehards still slope up against the bar, pulling on pinches of snuff between sips of their halves and house doubles, with trips outside to smoke in the fresh air. Jessup and he used to sit in one of the tiny snugs, little more than booths, so they could discuss cases without being overheard. But today, Staffe maintains a spot at the bar with a pint of Adnams. The landlord, Rod, looks as if he half recognises Staffe, but he doesn't say anything, even when Staffe offers him your own. When the change comes, Staffe sees he took for one anyway. He bides his time, looks around with a scratch of the ear, a readjustment of the trousers, a trip to the paper rack. There is no sign of Jessup, and Staffe finishes his drink and orders a Lafroig. It's the reason they made a habit of coming here. Jessup introduced Staffe to the Islay malt, and he couldn't get enough. Not everywhere has it. Staffe surrenders to the slow wash of nostalgia. The old times seem happier than they were, now in the beer's sepia, as the slow roast of the malt takes him right the way back. He says to Rod, as casually as he can muster, "I don't suppose you remember, but I used to come in here, with a friend of mine." I remember all right. You're a copper. The old soaks down the bar turn, look him up and down and take a drink before they each take a half step away. Bob Jessup. I don't suppose he still comes in. The landlord shrugs and the soaks say nothing. If he didn't still come in, they'd have said. They know Jessup all right. Not been in today? He used to love his Sunday lunches, says Staffe. End of Disc 7. Disc 8. Rod turns his back and bends down, comes up with a packet of scratchings from a box and puts it in the one empty clip in the rack beneath the optics. Never mind. Staffe drains his Lafroig. See you again. He goes into the dark, narrow corridor that leads outside and opens the door. The brilliant day floods in. Staffe lets the door swing its violent slam shut. But he remains in the corridor, his back to the panelled wall. He holds his breath and listens hard. After a minute, maybe more, Staffe begins to feel foolish, makes to leave. But then, just a few feet away, he gets what he wants. Rod starts to talk, telephone loud. He's been in. Longish hair, yeah. He asked after you straight out. Nope, not a dicky bird. Having heard enough, Staffe opens the door and walks into the light, closing the door ever so gently behind him. He has to meet Sylvie in San Giorgio, round the back of Leicester Square, in less than an hour. He can't be late, not after all this time. Instead, he goes west, to Hammersmith. The Viva room is on AMIP's 6th floor. Viva is the case's code word. Victim vengeance. Viva. In some places, Viva means life. Aha! Calls Smethurst across the room as Staffe enters. You grace us with your presence. Everyone in the room sees the funny side. Even Johnson joins in the crack of Smethurst's laughing policeman. Just thought I might be able to help. We're getting on just fine, Inspector, but it's nice of you to pop in. Smethurst walks right up to Staffe and puts a hand on his back, ushering him to a quieter place. If the officers in the room didn't already know, it shows them exactly who's boss. Staffe wants to shrug him away, but he fights his instincts and simply flexes his shoulders, walks with Smethurst into a small meeting room. We're pushing ahead with this now, Will. Say what you like, but we've already got our killer for Laurie Stenson, and with a bit of luck, if he doesn't top himself, he'll get his parole in a few years. Staffe tries to work out whether Smethurst has tied Jessup into the case. And if he has, what is he doing about it? I wanted a word with Johnson. Maybe you can persuade him to go home. He's a good man, but he's done in. Most of the continuity work is finished. I'll send him in. Smethurst turns at the door. Oh, and Will? Yes? I understand if you don't want to be involved. I wouldn't want to, if I was you. Staffe says nothing. As he waits for Johnson, he smells drink on himself. It reminds him of younger days in smoky pubs that supposedly smelled of wormwood scrubs. And too many right-wing meetings, he says aloud. Talking to yourself, boss, says Johnson. It's a song. The Jam. Johnson looks as if he's been kept awake every night for a month. How's the case going? The website should blast it open. The techies are working on it now. Johnson looks around, uncomfortable. Staffe thinks about the needle and makes a mental note to check with Janine precisely which narcotic his DS has been injecting himself with. Any fresh leads? I heard you went to see Cashel. Staffe nods. "We're not going down that road," says Johnson. "What about Delilah Spears?" As he asks the question, Staffe studies Johnson for his response. His face flickers, then breaks into a grimace, then a coughing fit. "Sorry, sir." "You taking something for that? Or is that the problem?" "I don't have a problem, sir." "She's on the VABA list. A bloke called Errol Regis raped her daughter, Martha Spears." "What makes you ask about her?" says Johnson. Staffe shrugs, says, "Her name cropped up in the Bowker transcript." "Well, like I said, D.I. Smethurst is going his own way." It feels like a first date. Walking down Gerrard Street, Staffe pictures Sylvie the last time they were together. Her hair was short in a French bob, shiny black and fashioned into sharp curves that came together on her pale, pale neck. Her eyes, green as new shoots in spring, were dewy wet from him being too much of a bastard once too often. He had a reason, but, like she said, he always had a reason. He's shown towards their table by the maître d', who seems to recognise Staffe. Sylvie is sitting by the window, looking out and twirling the ice in her Campari and soda. He should have got here first, but then he wouldn't have seen her this way, the sun flitting across her, through her flimsy cotton dress. "I'm sorry," he says, sitting. "So sorry." A waiter hovers, asks him what he would like to drink. Bloody Mary, please," he says. "You look as though you've had a few." "It's the weekend," he says. "You've changed." And she has. Her hair is long, wavy and full, resting on her shoulders, shiny. She looks happier than he remembers. "I haven't." "Have you chosen?" he says, opening the menu. "I don't need to. I know what I'm having." "It was work, that's why I'm late." "Don't apologise." He looks down at the menu, even though he knows what he will have. He takes a breath. "You're happy now?" "I always was." "Sometimes, a lot of the time—" "Nobody died, Will. At least we didn't get stuck." The waiter brings his drink. "Chin chin." They clink glasses, and she says, "Chin chin," laughing. "At least I made some kind of a mark on you." The sun catches her hair, the side of her face. She shimmers. Her eyes shine. "I know there's a good reason you're late, and I know you might start to tell me, but I know that you'll stop." "I can't tell you exactly why." "Exactly." She smiles fondly. "You always did the right thing, Will. For better or worse." "What do you mean?" She takes a drink. "You do the right thing, but it's not a good thing. You do the right thing because you can't do anything else." She puts her hand across the table and takes hold of his, squeezes it. "I'm glad you called." The waiter reappears, holding his black leather notebook, folded open for their order. Staffe says, "The lady will have the Morisco soup, then the turbot, and I'll have the smoked salmon, then the skate. And we'll have a bottle of aligoté and the bruy, together." The waiter nods approvingly, and Sylvie shakes her head, says, "I might have changed my mind." "You said you hadn't changed," says Staffe, finishing his Bloody Mary. "Do you still have your friends?" she says. "I never had many friends." He looks into her eyes and she smiles. "Never that many." "Whatever happened to that old rogue Jessup?" "Jessup? Why do you ask?" Staffe feels his breath go short. "Don't look at me like that, Will." "Why ask about him?" "It's a perfectly innocent question." Innocent. A strange word to use. The waiter brings the starters and they both lean back. A different waiter brings the wine. He holds out a bottle in each hand, offers the red to Staffe, who indicates that the lady is to taste. As he readjusts, Sylvie looks daggers at Staffe, who watches the wine being poured. "It will be fine, just pour it," says Sylvie, and leans forward, hisses, "Don't be suspicious with me, Will. I only asked how he was." "I saw him the other day. Funny, isn't it, us being here, me seeing Jessup?" "Is that why you called me?" "No. It's just one of those life tricks." "Of course it is." She pulls a face, then takes a good slug of her brouilly, and as she swallows it down, her features relax, almost into a smile. That's good. So, how is he?" "You know he got kicked out of the Met." "We were still together." "And Dolores left him." "That was on the cards." "What do you mean?" "They were dead in the water. She told me." "She told you?" "If you remember, we were both alone at the same time. She'd call me. I can't believe you didn't know." "Know what?" "He was having an affair." "With that woman in the CPR. Is that right?" She takes another slug of her wine, leans back and wipes her mouth with the starched linen napkin. "CPR? You were always saying they got in your way." "CPS? You mean CPS? What was her name?" The drink has got to her eyes and they sparkle. "Can you remember her name?" "Yes." "And what was it?" "Can't we talk about us?" "Yeah, of course we can. What was her name?" Sylvie looks sad. "Ruthie something. I had an aunt called Ruth. She was my favourite." "I remember. Does she still live down in Rye?" Which makes Sylvie smile. Sylvie stands with her arms crossed in the window of the Queen's Terrace flat, looking out. "Do you want me to draw the curtains?" says Staffe. "It's still light. Why would you want the curtains drawn?" She turns, eyes glistening and her mouth soft from drink. She tilts her head and reaches out, takes the glass of wine from him. She draws her fingers across his as she does it. "You've got big fingers, Will." "Big fingers? Why would you say that?" "I always liked them." She takes a slug from her wine, puts the glass down and goes up to him. She stands so their legs dovetail, clasps her hands behind her back and leans back from the hip. "Why shouldn't I say it?" She laughs. "No reason." He can smell drink on her as she speaks. He watches her tongue as she speaks, feels her against his thigh. "You know I never had the measure of you, Will. Most girls would never say that of a man they love." "Love?" "I loved you, Will." She reaches up on tiptoes, hooks a finger in the top of his jeans and pulls herself up against him. With her mouth an inch from his, she says, soft as you like, "And you loved me." With the L of loved, she flicks his lip with her tongue. She puts her hand on the back of his neck, kisses him, slow, soft, and with her eyes wide open. He feels as if he doesn't know her at all. She slips a second finger down the top of his jeans, brings her thumb up against the top button. "I'll draw the curtains," he says. "After all these years, you finally learn," she says. He draws the curtains, and when he turns round, she's pulling the flimsy cotton dress over her head. She stands there naked, bar her strappy sandals. She puts her hands on her hips and smiles. "You coming?" she says. "I don't know," he says. He wants to hold her. He wants to tell her he loves her. He wants a life he never had. She picks up her dress from the floor and holds it over her, walking backwards out of the room. Sunday evening. Staffe pays the cab and feels for the pavement beneath his outstretched foot. He rubs his face and squints up at Ledengate, the evening sun still bright in the western sky. He walks up the steps and hears his name in a familiar voice. He struggles to place it, and then his heart sinks as he turns. Nick Absalom has his pad and pen at the ready. "You said I could have first run on any breaks in the case?" says Absalom. "I'll let our press officer know." Staffe turns, takes another step. "I'd say that you being investigated by the Police Complaints Authority is pretty newsworthy." "Who told you?" "Oh, you can give us your version, or we'll speculate." "I haven't got time for this. At the moment, I've only got one headline for this case, and unfortunately, it's you." "Oh, go to hell!" Staffe takes the steps two at a time and kicks open the front door. Jombo looks at him disapprovingly, says, "DC Chancellor has been asking for you. She wants you to call her." Staffe watches Absalom leaning against a pillar, making notes. As he does, a thin smile shows in the corners of the journalist's mouth. "I hear you've been back in touch with Jessup," says Jombo. "Give him my best." "He was a good friend, wasn't he, John?" "He thought the world of you, Will." Staffe makes his way up to his office, feeling for his mobile phone. He checks all his pockets, trying to remember where he has left it, and making a mental note to call Josie. As the computer boots up, he stretches out his legs, crosses his arms across his chest, closes his eyes, and breathing deep incants, "Pacify yourself." He measures out his breathing, waits for his pulse to calm, tries to fathom why he turned Sylvie away. When he opens his eyes, he leans forward, slowly moves the cursor to the web address box. He clicks victimvengeance.com and tries to imagine Jessup doing the things that were done to Lottie Stenson, Carl Colquhoun and Guy Montefiore. He pictures him with the hammer, the scalpel, the ropes. He tries to kindle the bitterness he must have felt, the slow death of faith in the law. He can't see Jessup being unfaithful to Dolores either. How can you think you know someone so well? The quadrants on the website are unchanged, and in the bottom right corner the image is still unfathomable. He goes into authorized searches and activates financial. A text box appears, and he fills in all the compulsory fields, all names, address, DOB, occupation, and clicks all accounts, all clearinghouses, and search last 5 years. Then amounts in excess of £10,000. Then says a prayer against coming up with the evidence he needs. The machine whirs and comes up with the protected data script boxes. He shouldn't know the password, but he does. He takes a breath and types it in. He presses send a last time. Aloud he says, "Sorry." Staffe makes his way through the almost empty building. It is late Sunday evening, and now the case is transferred to AMIP. Ledengate echoes with old, shoved-aside crimes. He looks up and down the stairwell, remembers good times. More good than bad, it seems now. He doesn't want to go back for Jessup, but knows it has to be him who does this. First, though, he has to discover one last thing about his friend. "What's you doing here?" says Sally Watkins, crossing her arms and not budging from the doorway. In the background, Staffe can hear the TV turned up too loud. He wonders what sounds Tarot must have been trying to obscure. "Can I have a quick word?" "Fire away." Staffe looks over her shoulder, nods to be invited in. "I've got company," says Sally, unashamed. "You gave an alibi to my colleague, D.S. Johnson." "You know what I do." "And I know you're underage." "So report me." She sneers, a completely different cup of tea from the girl who made him a tuna Marie Rose sandwich less than a week ago. "You could have before, but you didn't. Why not? You feel sorry for me? Jails are all full." Staffe feels out of control. "What is it you really want?" "I want you to think back to when, Montefiore attacked you." "If you know he attacked me, do something about it." "I'm trying to, for God's sake, can't you see that?" Sally takes a pace back. A flicker of warm blood comes to her face, and her eyes soften. She uncrosses her arms and clasps them together on her narrow child's hips. He says, "Before the case was withdrawn, the police interviewed you, right?" She nods, looks over her shoulder and back again. "There was a senior officer, a bit older than me. His name was Jessup. D.I. Jessup." She looks at the floor and shakes her head. "Come on, Sally, this is important. Please." "What's going on?" An angry male voice cuts through the sound of the TV. It sounds familiar. "I've got to go," she says, taking a hold of the door. "Sally, Jessup did talk to you, didn't he? Please. If he didn't, I need to know." "Never heard of him." She closes the door and Staffe jams it with his foot. "You ain't got no warrant. You can't force your way in." "Oi! Sally!" comes the man's voice. "I'm sorry, Sally, for what happened, but there's other people suffering here." "Well, anybody wants to swap with me, they're welcome." "You shouldn't be doing this," says Staffe, looking over her shoulder towards the man's voice. "He's a friend." She looks hurt. Staffe withdraws his foot, but holds the door ajar with his outstretched arm. "If you tell me, it will help bring Montefiore to justice." She smiles at him as if he is a fool. "And how would you do that?" She pushes the door harder, and Staffe lets it go. In the instant that it slams in his face, Staffe gets a snapshot slice of Sally Watkins' face. She looks disappointed in him, way beyond her years. "You know him all right," Staffe calls out. As he walks along the concrete walkway to the stairwell, he mutters, "Bloody Jessup! Bloody fool!" He leans against the wall in the stairwell. It takes half an hour, but when it comes, it's worth it. Ross Dennis emerges from the Watkins' flat with his head down, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, and looking for all the world as if he didn't get what he went for. Staffe drops in at Queen's Terrace before going to see Jessup. When the cab draws up, he sees the curtains are still drawn, and the stupid argument from years ago reprises, the second time in as many days. Then he double takes. On the steps to his front door is a familiar-looking figure. She looks downcast, staring into the distance, chewing her nails, something he's never seen her do before. As soon as he slams the cab door behind him, she stands up, looking nervous. "Where have you been?" says Josie. "I've been calling you." "I must have left my phone inside." He nods up at his flat. "Well, didn't the station say to call me?" "I've been busy." "We've cocked up. Remember when we went to the Vaber office? I left my jacket there. I knew we shouldn't have gone." "Shit," says Staffe, looking up and down the street as he walks up the path. "Come in." He opens the place up and goes into the kitchen. "My tube pass is in the pocket." "We'll go and get it tomorrow." "Can't you do it tonight?" "There's something I have to do on my own." "You shouldn't be doing things on your own." Staffe picks his mobile phone up off the dresser. Is he letting things slide? The phone tells him he has 6 missed calls, 4 from Josie and 2 from Smethurst. He goes into the view details and sees Smethurst has only just called him. "Why don't you make us some coffee? I've just got to get this." "It won't be a minute," he says, pressing call as he goes into the living room. He draws the curtains back, stands in the window looking out as he waits for Smethurst to pick up. Opposite, a taxi stops. Its light goes off and an old lady emerges. She smiles at the cabbie and looks up at Staffe. Waves. "Where the hell have you been, Staffe?" says Smethurst, clearly unhappy. "Getting a bite to eat?" "We've got a problem here. Montefiore has discharged himself from hospital." "Why would he do that?" "He says he was threatened. We've had a uniform on his door, but he reckons he was asleep and someone came in and held a chloroform rag to his mouth and a knife to his throat. It's bullshit." "He'd know all about chloroform." "It makes us look like muppets. It's bad enough that we have to guard a child molester without him trumping up some dereliction theory." "It's your case, Smet." "He's asking for you, Staffe. He won't talk to anyone else, and he says if he can't talk to you, he'll go to the press." "Asking for me?" "He says you can save him, says you're the only one." Smethurst hangs up. Another taxi pulls up across the road. This time the light stays on. When he turns round, Josie is standing in front of the sofa, a hand on her hip, waiting, exactly where Sylvie was. "I've got to go to Montefiore's," he says. "Do you want me to come?" "I could do with your help." She wiggles a finger in her ear. "Am I hearing things?" "You heard right," says Staffe, allowing himself a smile. It's getting dark. He looks up and down the road as they walk to his car. As they pass the cab, the light is off, but there is nobody in the back. It seems weeks since Staffe was last at 48 Billingham Street. Now, with evening, the sky streaked like rainbow trout. It is a less sinister place, save the uniformed officer on the front door. He checks Staffe's warrant card, opens the door and smiles at Josie, looking her up and down. "Were you on duty at the hospital when they got in and threatened him?" says Staffe. The officer looks sheepish. Yes, sir. I don't know how they got in, honestly, I don't." "Nip off for a cup of tea, did you?" "No. I've given a statement. It's the truth." Staffe can tell what the constable is thinking. What a waste of time protecting a child molester. No wonder the police get a bad press. Montefiore sits in a reproduction library chair with a rug over his lap. His eyes are dark and he is gaunt, like someone from a different economy. Staffe can smell soup, probably the only thing Montefiore can take. He's holding a mobile phone in both hands, as if his life depended on it. Staffe pulls up a framed Louis XV chair, another reproduction, and sits a couple of feet away from Montefiore. He looks into his eyes and tries to forget what he did to Sally Watkins, what he tried to do to Tanya Ford. "Tell me what happened, Guy." "He just appeared in that balaclava again. He came from nowhere." "You're sure it was a man?" "The same as the first time, you know, when he did what he did." Montefiore looks as if he might be sick. "And what did he say this time? Exactly?" Josie is looking out of the window, trying not to be conspicuous. "I don't want her here. He said it was you who could help me, only you." Staffe nods for Josie to leave them alone. "I'll have a coffee. Do you want anything?" he says to Montefiore. Montefiore shakes his head slowly, and as Josie leaves, he leans forward, beckons Staffe to come closer. As he does, Montefiore smiles at him. It is a look of fondness, and makes Staffe look at his shoes. "He said you're a good man." Montefiore's smile cracks. "He said, 'I'll be back. This is to show I can get to you any time I want.' He said, 'You'll see me coming and nothing will save you. Only Wagstaff can save you. Keep him close, I warn you.'" Staffe looks up, determined to find some kind of perspective. Montefiore has tears in his eyes, and he leans forward more, lets the mobile phone drop into his lap and reaches out to take a hold of Staffe's hand. He clasps them the way you would a lover who was trying to leave you. "You can save me, Inspector." He looks at Staffe, as if it is the last blast of love to someone you know doesn't feel the same. "You will, won't you? You will save me." "Why don't you confess, Guy? Let Sally Watkins move on. It's the right thing. You can save yourself." "You don't care. I can tell." Montefiore lets go of Staffe's hands. "Why do they say you can save me when you don't even care?" Staffe thinks about this and tries to make sense of the warnings he has received, the messages too. "Why do you think he would say that, Guy?" "Because you're the only one with a real faith in the law." "The things you've done, that's quite a compliment." "What precisely does the law say I have done?" "Tell me why you did it, Guy. Tell me that and I can help you. Who hurt you, Guy?" "You wouldn't believe it." "And why did you marry? You never loved her." "You don't have to love them." Montefiore looks back up at Staffe. He doesn't quite smile. Staffe dearly wants to spurn this sick and damaged man, but knows he can't. He wants to be anywhere but here, yet here he is, stretched to breaking point. He stands, says, "I will save you, Guy. Tell him that next time." "Next time?" Staffe makes his way down the hall to the kitchen, and what he sees through the glass panes of the door stops him in his tracks. He can feel his pulse quicken, the colour come to his face, a thin trail of sweat at the nape of his neck. He feels so far removed from the younger self that joined the force. Josie is sitting at Guy Montefiore's kitchen table, her hands interlocked around a mug of tea, looking studiously down, avoiding Staffe. Standing beside her is DCI Pennington, shaking his head slowly. "What the hell is going on?" Pennington frowns, tight-lipped, and Staffe hears a mechanical cough. It comes from neither Josie nor Pennington. He looks around and realises it is piped in from elsewhere. It was Montefiore coughing. There is a loud speaker on the dresser. "You bugged us. You bastards. You can't trust me to tell you what he said." Josie looks up pleadingly, as if to say she had nothing to do with it, but she says nothing. "You haven't exactly been straight with us, have you? And quite frankly, I'm glad I heard what I did. It's all pretty disturbing stuff, pretty disturbing." "What is?" "Your relationship with Montefiore." "What?" "Hardly regular, is it?" "I am trying to get him to confess to a crime." "Well, he seems to think you're on his side." "I wasn't the one who let him off the hook." "Why didn't you tell me you were going to see Cashel? Or were you afraid you were barking up the wrong tree, causing a vulnerable prisoner to make an attempt on his own life?" "He didn't kill Otis Denson. I know for a fact." "Which fact? Go on. Show me the fact." Staffe looks down, tries to slow his fast-beating heart. He takes a step back from Pennington, who suddenly seems like the enemy. "And I know about the break-in to the office on Kennington Lane. I don't know why you couldn't just use a warrant like anybody else. And why you had to drag DC Chancellor into it, He didn't drag me, sir. I went of my own volition." "Well, that's not exactly true, sir," says Staffe. Pennington plunges his hands into his pockets and sighs. He looks out of the window. "We've had a complaint from the parents of Tanya Ford, too. They say you attacked the father." "That's nonsense." "There was a care worker there. She doesn't contradict their claims." "He came at me. I was just trying to get some justice for their daughter. They call it disclosure, sir." Pennington turns, puts his hands behind his back, as if he was at a scene of crime, protecting evidence. He takes a step towards Staffe. "Meting out justice, regardless of procedure. Where have we heard that before?" "It's not like that." "It doesn't look good, Staffe." Staffe looks into Pennington's cold grey eyes. "What exactly are you saying?" "The PCA are following through on the E-Gang's accusations. The spotlight's on." He takes another step closer. Staffe can smell the clean lemon of his aftershave, as though the long, hot day has taken no toll. Suddenly Staffe feels tired, outgunned. "I have to be seen to be white on this one. Whiter than white. I hope you'll play ball, Staffe." "Ball?" Staffe loses his breath. He fears the worst, and his jaw is so slack it feels like stage fright. But he knows this isn't make-believe, this is his life. "I'm going to have to ask you where you were when Carl Colquhoun was murdered, and when Guy Montefiore was attacked." "I can't believe this." Staffe sits at the kitchen table. He feels dizzy. "You were at the scene. You were here when it happened, Staffe. You opened the door that did for him. Believe me, I want the right answers. For your sake and mine." "Are you arresting me?" "I'm warning you, D.I. Wagstaff. This is a formal warning in the presence of DC Chancellor. I want a full explanation of all your movements during the past week. I want alibis and witnesses. And I don't want you within a country mile of this bloody case. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir." "On my desk tomorrow." "Are you suspending me, sir?" I'm afraid I have no choice, Inspector. Darkness descends, and the lime-kiln tower looms over Gibbett's Lane like a blue-black giant. Errol Regis looks out of his living-room window to see the flame burning beneath the drum of tar in the pathway to the unoccupied house next door. The pink-streaked sky is low tonight. Errol had called the council to see what's going on, but received only the answering service. They don't open for business until 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. In the meantime, he looks up and down the street and paces from room to room. He makes pots of tea that don't get drunk. He flicks from channel to channel, stopping on the weather even though he has heard it before. As soon as the news comes on, he switches away. He takes a sleeping pill and checks the bolts on all the doors and says a prayer that Teresa makes some kind of return, even if it is just to collect more of her things. Like he always does, he says a prayer for Martha Spears, and finally he asks God to one day let the truth arise, that he may be forgiven for something he never did. And, as usual, he curls up like a fetus, listening to the deep resound of his own heart. As he drives home, Staffe designs a route towards what seems an improbable sleep. He will run himself a deep Radox bath and open a decent bottle of red. Then he will watch the cricket highlights in bed and, hopefully, drift away. Then he will rise early and document his whereabouts ever since the afternoon Carl Colquhoun was murdered. He has never been able to turn a blind eye to a problem. Outside the V&A, he sees a newsstand touting the news, and he feels a bubble of bile. He tries to swallow it away, begins to sing a song in his head. For some reason, the opening refrain of Love for Sale announces itself. He indicates away from home, turning away from all the things he has prescribed. Staffe can't get Jessup out of his mind. Why the hell would he do the things Staffe thinks he has done? Montefiore's recanted words resound. Only Wagstaff can save you. Keep him close, I warn you. But there will be a time when he won't be there. Were they Jessup's words? Staffe can't help feeling his old friend might have played him like a fiddle. When he gets to Jessup's place, Staffe sees lights on all the way up the building, until you get to Jessup's windows that jut from the sloping slate roof. He isn't surprised to get no response from the intercom, and feels the ring of keys in his pocket. He thinks about the alibis he must produce, the hearing he will have to face. What else can he do but uncover the truth? He picks out a key and puts it to the lock, slips inside and takes the stairs one at a time in the dark. At the top, he knocks lightly on Jessup's door, just enough to raise him, not enough to draw attention from the flats below. When he gets no response, he removes his diary and pen, takes off his leather jacket and drapes it on the floor in the corner of the small landing. He checks that Jessup won't see him as he comes up the stairs, and he begins to jot down his precise movements at the times in question. When Carl Colquhoun was being delicately butchered, he had cooked a meal for Josie, was packing for Spain. And as for Montefiore, that night he had gone for a run and asked Johnson to take care of Marie's bullying boyfriend. He had gone to bed, found an imperfect sleep, a good match for his imperfect alibi. He snugs down into the corner of the landing where the walls and the floor meet. He pulls his jacket up around him and smells the leather and pubs and too much hurry. He feels so weary, but knows he cannot allow himself the luxury of sleep. His eyes lid down, and he blinks himself awake, feels himself drifting again. He thinks of dinner with Sylvie, can see her standing naked. He remembers the cut of her hair and the deep green of her eyes, the way she spoke as she ate, spearing the turbot flesh with her fork. On the back of his eyelids, he pictures the way she looked when she spoke of her favourite aunt, as though she had never left him, as though the last 3 years had been a dream, a long, long dream. A searing light wakes Staffe. He blinks into the fierce white. He smells meat on a man's breath, can feel the dull weight of something blunt on his throat. He struggles to breathe and squints into the lights, trying to see what is beyond. Right up against his face is the leather sole of a boot, the frayed edge of trouser bottoms. He tries to lever himself up, but he can't. Do yourself a favour, Staffe. You think you're doing good, but you're not. Believe me, says Jessup. He talks calm and slow, as if he has nothing to fear from his friend. Staffe tries to work out where he is and how long he has been asleep. He stretches out with his right hand, feels wood and the coarse fabric of worn carpet, the soft leather of his own jacket. Even though he can see nothing beyond the torchlight, up close and shining straight into his eyes, he starts to remember. Jessup says, "Believe me, there are forces of good at play here. More than you might imagine." Staffe fancies his chances to overcome Jessup, but doesn't want to hurt him. "Let me up! We're friends, for God's sake." "Some friends we've turned out to be." "I could have handed you to Smethurst and AMIP, but I want to be wrong. Tell me I'm wrong." He drags his legs around, prepares to spring up, but one of his legs snags. Something bites into his ankle, and he realises he is tethered. "What exactly is it that you think I've done?" Jessup takes his foot away and lowers the torchlight. "Keep your voice down. I've got neighbours, you know." Staffe takes his chance and makes to spring up off his free leg. But he falls back to the floor, bangs his head against the wall, and sees that his ankles are tied together. "What the hell?" Jessup slowly places a heel on Staffe's chest. "Go on. Tell me what you've got." "Nico Cashel didn't kill Lottie Stenson, and you know it. And you pull the Sally Watkins prosecution, you and Ruth Merritt between you. Why would I do such a thing, friend? You are pissed off with the law, fed up with the way you were treated, the way people got off. And your evidence? There's no interviews. There are massive gaps in the file evidence on that case. Only one interview with the defendant. There's no sign whatsoever that you saw Sally Watkins, but I know you did. I hope that's not your idea of evidence. Do you have a statement from Sally? Tell me I'm wrong. Deny it. You know a lot from a man who's been suspended. How do you know I've been suspended? Let it go, Will. How can you let Cashel do his time? You should leave Well alone. He was all right until you upset his apple cart. You killed Stenson, didn't you? And you're letting an innocent man serve your time. And as he says this, Staffe has the hollow feeling he has underestimated Jessup. Jessup lifts his foot off Staffe's chest and turns off the torch. In the dark, Staffe can discern the crouching figure of Jessup. The smell of meat on his breath is stifling now. I went to see Stenson to get a confession out of her. We had other accusations, but nobody would disclose. There would have been others, too, if we hadn't. Jessup sighs, and his speech slows right down. You should have seen the way she looked at me, as if she was better than me. I could have killed her there and then, wiped that smug look off her face. She saw it, and she screamed the place down, accused me of trying to beat her. So I went back to see Nico. You killed her. He wasn't supposed to confess. Everybody had alibis. Everybody in Vaba. It's not what you think. Well, what about the 50 grand? In the half-light, Staffe sees Jessup's mouth go slack. His eyes turn from angry to sad. What 50 grand, he says. The 50 grand Vaba paid you to do all this, to live out their fantasies of revenge and record it all. You recorded it all for them, didn't you? Jessup stands up again, rests his boot on Staffe's chest and puts all his weight on it, supporting himself on the banister. You think this is for money? Do you, my friend? Do you? Staffe can't get his breath. He thinks he will pass out. Thinks his breastbone is about to crack, breaking into pieces and piercing his lungs. Please! He wheezes, his eyes filling with water, life draining away. Jessup bends down towards him. Staffe has adjusted to the dark now, and through the glaze of his own watery eyes, Jessup's sad face comes bigger and bigger. He smells a chemical. You know, Will, if you could see yourself the way you were when you first came to Ledengate, you were washed up. You had nowhere to go. But I saw a spark. Nobody else did, just me. I took you on, and it was the right thing to do. If only we could see ourselves as others do, eh, Will? That would be something. The smell gets closer, stronger. It's a smell Staffe has come to recognise. And with the last blots of sensory perceptions running into each other, he feels the damp rub of gauze around his mouth and nose. He tries to hold what little breath remains, but he can't. And as he breathes in, he slips away. Monday morning. Pulford minimises victimvengeance.com, and the snuffcast, as Nick Absalom calls it, disappears into its icon at the bottom of the screen to reveal the home page of Poker Rich. Pulford rubs his face, the way you would rub a whiteboard clean. He leans back in his chair and takes the mouse. The cursor hovers over Join Game. He looks down at the financial statements on the floor and blows his cheeks out. He leaves the cursor where it is and goes into his tiny kitchen, makes himself a black coffee because there is no milk. He tries Staffe's mobile again and gets the answering service, doesn't bother to leave another message. He curses Staffe and goes back to his workstation. You're only ever one game from a change of luck. One more punt might turn the tide that got him into this predicament. He raises the mug to his mouth and it burns his lips. He takes it as a sign and says, "Fuck it. Fuck you," and closes the site down, turns the computer off. He looks at the pile of statements and sits cross-legged on the floor, making separate piles of HSBC, Ladbrokes, PayPal and Barclaycard, putting the most recent bills on the top. He rounds the totals down to the nearest 100 and tots up in his head, adds on another 700 for last month's unpaid rent. He might get 2.5 for the MR2, but he still owes the finance company 3 grand. All in all, he's looking at 22 grand. 8 months' salary. His parents keep asking him when he's going to buy a place of his own, get a foot on that ladder. They don't know he's sliding down snakes. A black suit hangs on the back of the door, ready to be worn to Carl Colquhoun's funeral. Even though he's not on the AMIP team, he will go, thinking it might rule a line under the case before he throws himself back into his backlog of car-ringing gangs, DVD smugglers, extortionists and immigrant sweatshops. He goes back to the kitchen and pours the coffee into the sink, takes a pair of scissors from the second drawer down and returns to the lounge, cuts his credit cards one by one into tiny pieces. Halfway through, he rubs his eyes and punches the pedestal of his desk. "Idiot," he says to himself. "Bloody idiot." The ceiling is dirty, and a paper lantern hangs from the cracked off-centre ceiling rose. Staffe rubs his eyes, wipes his mouth. He can tell they have fashioned this entire flat from a single old room, probably for a servant in a moderately well-to-do family. He remembers what happened last night. Was it last night? And he waits for the anger to surge at him, but it doesn't. He feels calm, kind of distant from himself, separate from the space he is in. He considers the quality of the refurbishment, sitting up and looking around at the bare room. No books, no ornaments. The sun streams in, showing the window smears. He stretches and yawns. He feels fresh, kind of brand new. "Jessup," he says softly, standing slowly. He paces sedately around the room, opening drawers and crouching to look under furniture. The place has been packed up and shipped out. There is a pile of dirty clothes in the corner by the kitchenette and junk mail in the paper basket, but apart from that, no sign of life except a single sheet of paper, blue-tacked to the microwave in the kitchenette. Staffe squints until it gradually comes into focus. It is handwritten. "Please, my friend, in the name of whatever friendship we had or will ever have, let this go. Don't follow. This will be resolved soon. Trust me. J." He ambles across to the window in the slope of the roof and bends to take in the view across North London's rooftops, remembering some of what his old friend had said last night. Staffe feels a vague compunction to call Smethurst, but considers that Jessup has left him untethered and unharmed. Thus he is disinclined to snitch on his old friend, even though the man did, after all, assault him. He begins to recall that he is suspended from the case. Yes, he is definitely suspended from the case. But he feels less miserable about this than he ought. As he makes coffee, the ceramic of the mug feels soft, and he thinks that his fingertips might not be entirely his own. He tries to pick his way through the conversations he had last night, remembering what Jessup told him about Lottie Stenson and Nico Cashel. Jessup has now fled far, of that he feels certain. He has probably gone to meet up with that woman. He can't quite remember her name. If he called Smethurst and put him on to Jessup, would it lead to Nico Cashel being released? Probably not. In the absence of a confession from Jessup, nothing has changed. And what does Staffe really know about Nico Cashel? What that poor, broken man wants for his life? What good has come of this long, protracted case of vengeances? Would good come from the incarceration of Bob Jessup? Only if he is to kill again, or if the law must always be an end in itself. He resolves to consider this. Staffe lets himself out and slips into the long blue day. His tread feels light, as though his feet barely touch ground. He walks briskly, not really knowing where he should go. He has a notion that he will be watched or followed, and switches sides of the road, looking around as he goes. Looking at the papers on the newsstand tells him it is Monday, and the position of the sun in the sky implies it is late morning. In the Sainsbury's on Kilburn High Road, they are queuing at the checkouts already. Perhaps people queue all day, every day. They always say, "Why'd you bother, Staffe? You don't have to work." Every day could be like this. Nothing behind him, nothing ahead, and God knows what new people he will meet, what joys and hardships he might encounter without having to do something about them. What has Jessup done to him? He wonders where his friend is now. On a plane? Or a boat? Has he found a kind of peace? Or love? Staffe cuts off the high road, not far now from his own house. He will call on his sister. That is what he will do. Marie opens the door to the Kilburn house, and she beams a broad smile when she sees him, throws her arms open wide and takes him in. She smells of something green, he thinks. Turquoise, perhaps. The house is spick, and there are fresh flowers on the coffee table. Lilies. He knows he might tell her to be careful the stamens don't fall on his fabrics. They stain. But he thinks she will probably know this for herself. Paolo gets up from his knees. He has a rag in his hand and there is a smell of lacquer. Has he been cleaning the hearth? He too is smiling, and he extends a hand, shakes Staffe's firmly. The swelling around the bridge of his nose is down, and the bruises on his eyes are fading. "Sprucing the place up, Will. I hope it's all right," says Paolo. Staffe sniffs up. Can't smell tobacco smoke. Behind him he hears a scream and a whoop, and something crashes into the backs of his legs, hard enough to knock him off balance. Paolo stops him from falling to the floor. "Harry, be careful," shouts Marie. "He's fine," says Staffe. "Just fine." He reaches down for Harry, picks him up and presses the infant's head hard to his cheek. "Take me park, Uncle Will," says Harry. "Take me park." "He's been doing my head in all morning," says Marie. "Strange you've come now." "Can I take him?" "Paolo and I have got to see about a car. We're getting a van, a small van, with some of the money. Paolo's going to start on the restaurants again. He has such green fingers, you know, for the herbs. We're going to lease the place out Surrey way. He's going to show Harry how to grow." "Take me to the park!" screams Harry. "Can I?" says Staffe. "Of course you can. It's meant to be," says Marie. Pulford looks at the jagged plastic snippets of the hole he is in. He scoops the credit card cuttings together with a cup palm and puts them in the bin, then showers, gets into his black suit and tries Staffe a final time, but gets no response. He trousers his mobile and picks up his keys, warrant card and notebook, and takes a look around the room, hoping he has put something behind him. Just as he is about to lock up, his mobile vibrates, then breaks into his ringtone, the chorus of the Clash's "I Fought the Law." Staffe gives him stick for it, says it might advertise what he is. Josie thinks it's funny. Johnson thinks it's sad. Everyone has an opinion, which is why he keeps it. He looks at the screen, sees it is Ledengate. As he raises it to his ear, he feels afraid. "Thank God somebody's answering me," says Pennington. "Where the hell is Staffe?" What is it, sir? Can I help?" "Tell him to get in touch with me, toot sweet." "Can I tell him what it's about?" Pennington pauses, eventually says, "You tell him there's been a major breakthrough. Smethurst has cracked it, no thanks to you and your so-called boss." "Cracked it, sir?" "Don't come the innocent with me, Sergeant. And don't think that you can always hide behind people like Staffe. You should have told me you knew it was Jessup. Nobody's bigger than the law, Sergeant, and you can tell Staffe that. Nobody. Staffe watches Harry from the park bench. He goes up to the other children and joins in, even though they're strangers. The mothers and fathers smile into next week at him and twiddle their fingers at Staffe, as if to say what a good job he is doing. He will take Harry to Hamley's later in the week, and maybe buy him a rugby ball. He will teach him to pass and kick, take him to see a game when the new season starts. Harry is on the roundabout now, playing nicely with younger and older children. Staffe feels a warm glow and stares off into infinity. There will be something of Staffe's mother and father in the boy. There may be something of Staffe in the boy, but will it ever show itself? Could it possibly transcend the difference between him and Marie? He tries to get his head round where her free-spiritedness comes from. Could it be the same place as Staffe got his, before it died? He reaches down into his pocket and pulls out his dead phone. He tries turning it on and can't recall if he turned it off or if the battery is dead. It sparks up and sings its jingle. He will call Sylvie. She said he could. She said not to be a stranger. Didn't she? A jangle of unread text messages. 6 missed calls, all from Pulford and Pennington. He highlights the most recent and presses call. "Staffe! Thank God! Where the hell have you been?" says Pulford. The case comes to him like many segments from different dreams. "I'm due some leave, Pulford. I'm going to take it." "Pennington's been on. He says Smethurst has got Jessup for the Colquhoun murder." "Got him? Did you know it was Jessup?" "Pennington thinks you did. He reckons you were protecting him. Why didn't you tell me, sir? He thinks I'm in on it." "Nobody knows anything, Sergeant," says Staffe. He crosses one leg over the other and leans right back into the bench, watching the top of the trees sway against the wide, blue, unclouded sky. "You sound strange, sir. You're coming to the funeral." "A funeral?" He can hear the children shouting and squealing. They sound further away. "Carl Colquhoun's funeral is at 2:00. Staffe looks for the sun, tries to work out what time it might be. "I'll come and get you," says Pulford. "When you say they've got Jessup, what do you mean? Have they got him?" "I reckon Pennington thinks you know where he is." "He'd be wrong." Staffe looks down, away from the sky and across to the swings and slide. There is nobody there. The children have gone. The parents have gone. He stands, looks all around him. "Sir? How would I know where he is?" "You went to see him. Your friends." Staffe looks at the playground. He knows something is wrong. "Harry?" he shouts. "Harry!" "Who's Harry?" "Sir, are you all right?" He clicks off the phone and walks towards the swings and slide, calling, "Harry! Harry!" as he goes. He climbs the steps of the slide, feels his pulse booming inside his head. He looks to the 4 corners of the park. There are several couples strolling. A handful of people are starting picnics or having a snatched lunch on the benches, but no Harry. He calls his name again, louder. Far away, a woman pulls her child close to her and scurries away. There is a copse of trees 50 yards away, and Staffe jumps down the steps, runs across the grass to the trees. Halfway, he stops dead in his tracks. He thinks of Tanya Ford and the rag he found in that copse. He is suddenly struck like a leather cosh across the back of the neck by how real the world is. "Harry!" he calls, sprinting hard for the trees. He ducks his head and calls Harry's name time and again inside the copse. The twigs scratch at his face as he crashes all the way through and out the other side. A lump forms in his throat and his stomach is tight. Suddenly, all the blood seems to drain from the muscles in his legs. He sinks to the ground and rests up against the trunk of a tree. In the distance are railings, and beyond, a pond. He sees a boy being led away by a man. "Harry!" he calls. "Harry!" The two of them turn around. Harry pulls away from the man's grip. The man looks up. He is smiling. Harry runs towards Staffe, and the man jogs after him. Staffe gets to his feet, clenches his fists as he runs towards the pond. Halfway, Harry runs into his midriff, knocks all the wind out of him. He bends double, holds Harry tight. The man's jog peters to a walk, and he says, "I hope you don't think I'm being funny, but are you his dad?" Marie is out, and Staffe isn't carrying a key to his Kilburn house, so he tells Pulford to get hold of Josie and meet him outside the Scotsman's pack, and hangs up. As he puts the phone in his pocket, he feels something sharp. He pulls out a torn foil blister pack of pills, empty. He studies the name of the medication Jessup must have forced on him, but it makes no sense. Wellbutrin. He slips the foil pack back into his pocket and takes a tight hold of Harry's hand. "Let's go and play with some of my friends, shall we?" As he says it, he feels dreadfully sad, and he can't help but hope that Jessup is safe and sound. In the Scotsman's, a few old boys have their elbows on the bar, looking at the racing pages and pinching snuff whilst they grumble about jockeys and how the whole game is a fix. They don't know why they bother, but they do. Staffe is sitting in the snug at a table by the window, teaching Harry to play pontoon. It's not a kid's pub, but Staffe had reminded the landlord, Rod, of who he was and what happens to people who withhold evidence. Harry has a J2O with a straw, and Staffe has a large malt. As he approaches uncle and nephew, Pulford sees there is further cause for concern. Staffe is smiling, looks thoroughly relaxed, and appears to be at peace with the world. "Get yourself a drink, Sergeant," says Staffe. "We're already late. The funeral started 5 minutes ago." "These things go on forever." "Smethurst is there." "Bully for Smet." "I think you'll need to get your story straight." "Story? I'll rely on the truth. Thank you very much, Sergeant." Staffe's eyes look heavy, but his glint is bright. An easy smile curls in one corner of his mouth. He looks as if he hasn't had a shower in a week. "You need to do what you can. Say what you can to protect yourself, sir." "Thanks for the advice." "Sir, I don't like to say, but what's wrong? You seem different." Pulford looks at the glass, the sun lighting up its golden barley. "How many of these have you had?" Staffe reaches into his pocket and tosses the empty sleeve of pills on the table. "I reckon I've had a few too many of these. Where's Josie?" Pulford picks up the blister pack. "Shit." "Good shit," says Staffe. "Where did you get these? They're not yours, surely." "A parting gift from an old friend." Pulford squints at the small print, says, "This is full of bupropion. It's a serious antidepressant, Jesus." And he presses his way through the menu of his phone, tracking a route to Janine in forensics. He gets the answering machine and leaves a message for her to call back ASAP, sooner if she can. "Josie's outside. She'll take the boy home and wait with him. Come on," he says to Staffe, standing. He extends a hand, but Staffe shrugs him away and downs the rest of his whiskey in one. Slowly he gets up from his chair, cajoling young Harry. The boy beams up at his uncle, clearly trusting that there will be many more where these good times come from. "Show the way, Sergeant. Show the way." And he takes Harry by the hand and leads him to his temporary childminder. For a split second his altered state is darkened by a snapshot tirade of what Marie will say when she sees Harry sitting in a patrol car outside the house in the custody of D.C. Josie Chancellor. By the time they get to the funeral, the service in the tiny chapel is finished, and the small gathering is forming a line towards the grave. The gravedigger leans on a long shovel, looking disinterested. Leanne Colquhoun is at the front with Calvin and Lee Angelique, done up like gelled poodles. Deborah Bowker is there too, keeping a distance and looking good in tight black. Pulford picks out Smethurst and Johnson at the back of the line, and they catch his eye. Johnson mouths something to the effect of, "What are you doing here?" They start to come across, and Pulford leads Staffe to a large yew tree with a bench around its base. "You sit here. Leave the talking to me, eh, sir?" "Well, let's see how you go." "Staffe?" "Pulford," says Smethurst. Johnson loiters a few paces away, kicking at the ground, hands in pockets, and looking as though he needs some of what Staffe has had. "I believe congratulations are in order, sir," says Pulford, trying to muster a smile. "That depends." Smethurst looks at Staffe, his eyebrows pinching together, the tip of his tongue peeking from the corner of his mouth. "What put you on to Jessup?" "I'm sure Inspector Wagstaff knows. Hey, Staffe." "All ears, Inspector Smethurst, all ears." Smethurst hands a folded note to Pulford, says, "It's a copy. You can keep it for old time's sake. Seems Jessup has a knack with confessions, except this one's his own." "Have you got him?" Smethurst shakes his head. "It came registered, posted yesterday from central London at 1 in the afternoon. We're checking all the flight lists, but I reckon he's gone. If he can do what he did to Colquhoun and Montefiore, plotting it ahead all these years, he can bloody well get out of the country. On a dodgy passport's my guess. Amount of grasses he's had down the years." Pulford reads the note aloud. "If you've got this, I suppose you might think you've got me. But you haven't. It's too late now, and all I can say is things got out of hand, turned on their head. You couldn't know what it was like, but if you'd known Stenson, you might have done what was done. Someone showed how, and I had to follow. But don't follow me, there's nothing to be achieved. What's done is done. The law is an ass, but you won't pin a tail on this old donkey. J." He hands it to Staffe and says, "Short and sweet." Staffe reads it through, but the words don't quite make sense to him. He watches the graveside scene take shape. Even from 50 yards away he can see that Leanne Colquhoun is shaking. Her head is dipped and her children are clutching at her legs, hiding their faces. End of Disc 8.